Leo's consciousness surfaced from the depths of sleep like a diver breaking through thick ice. The first sensation was weight, not the comforting press of a mattress, but a peculiar heaviness that seemed to shift across his body in uneven waves. He opened his eyes to the familiar wooden ceiling of the room Marta had given him in Oakhaven, but something felt fundamentally wrong. The morning light filtering through the window didn't fall in straight lines, it wavered, bending subtly as if passing through disturbed water. He sat up slowly, every movement requiring conscious effort. His body remembered the strain of those final edits, the tearing sensation as he'd woven physics into the fabric of this world, the way his vitality had drained to near nothing. Though physically recovered from the immediate collapse, a permanent weariness had settled into his bones. More concerning was the emptiness where divine energy should hum. He pulled out his phone, the screen glowing with the familiar interface of Deus Ex Machina. The energy readout confirmed what he already felt, 3 out of 100, with the regeneration indicator showing a flat line. Locked. The app had saved him from total depletion, but at the cost of leaving him stranded at this critical low. Getting to his feet proved more challenging than expected. As he stood, his weight seemed to increase momentarily, pressing him toward the floorboards before lightening just as abruptly. He stumbled, catching himself on the rough-hewn bedpost. Gravity anomalies. The thought came with a mix of professional interest and deep unease. His edits had stabilized the fundamental laws, but apparently not perfectly, not when his energy was this depleted. Residual fluctuations, like ripples after a stone thrown into a pond. He moved to the window, each step requiring careful adjustment to the shifting gravitational pull. Outside, Oakhaven's morning unfolded with a deceptive normalcy. Smoke curled from chimneys, villagers moved about their tasks, chickens pecked at the ground. But Leo's trained eye caught the subtle signs. A bucket of water being carried didn't swing in a smooth arc, it jerked slightly, as if the water's weight changed mid-swing. Leaves falling from an oak tree didn't follow clean parabolic paths, they drifted in erratic patterns, sometimes accelerating downward, sometimes hanging for moments too long. The door creaked open, and Marta entered with a tray of food. The village elder's face showed the strain of recent weeks more clearly than Leo remembered. New lines etched the corners of her eyes, and her movements carried a careful deliberation that spoke of constant vigilance. "You're awake," she said, her voice carrying the same measured tone. "I thought I heard movement." She set the tray on a small table, bread, cheese, and what looked like some sort of preserved meat. As she did, the tray tilted slightly, the contents shifting as if the table's surface had momentarily become uneven. Marta didn't react, but Leo noticed the slight tightening of her jaw. "How long have the gravity fluctuations been happening?" Leo asked, his voice raspy from disuse. Marta looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. "Since you stabilized things. They're minor, most of the time. But noticeable. The children think it's funny, jumping and feeling lighter sometimes. The adults find it less amusing when tools slip from their hands or carts become unexpectedly heavy." She paused, studying him. "You look better than when they brought you back. But not well." Leo managed a weak smile. "I used everything I had. More than everything." "So we gathered," Marta said, her tone softening slightly. "The priests have been quieter. Brother Kalen still performs the rituals, but there's less fire in his sermons about unnatural forces. I think even he recognizes that whatever you did saved more than it destroyed." They ate in silence for a few minutes, Leo forcing himself to consume the food despite a lack of appetite. The bread tasted like ash in his mouth, but he knew he needed the energy. Real energy, not the divine kind he could no longer access. "Has there been word from elsewhere?" he asked between bites. Marta's expression darkened. "Rumors. Travelers speak of worse disruptions in the cities. Spells failing at critical moments. Magical artifacts behaving erratically. Some say entire districts have been quarantined where the very air behaves strangely, becoming thick one moment, thin the next." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "There are stories of people vanishing. Not just dying or leaving, but disappearing. As if they never existed. And shadows that move against the light." A chill ran through Leo that had nothing to do with the morning air. His edits had been meant to create stability, a hybrid system where physics and magic could coexist. But with his energy so depleted, had he created something incomplete? A patchwork reality with weak points. After Marta left to attend to village matters, Leo retrieved his invention sketchpad from where it lay beside his bed. The simple tool felt heavier than it should, another reminder of the gravity fluctuations. He opened it to a fresh page, his mind already working through the problem. If he couldn't use divine energy to directly monitor the stability of his edits, he needed a workaround. Something that could detect energy fluctuations, reality fractures, whatever was causing these anomalies. The solution came to him with the clarity of a well-understood physics principle. A simple harmonic oscillator, but modified. If reality itself was experiencing fluctuations in its fundamental constants, those fluctuations would create minute disturbances in any sensitive measuring device. He began sketching, a pendulum, but not one measuring time. This would measure stability. A weight suspended on a thin wire, with a mechanism to record its oscillations. If gravity fluctuated, the pendulum's period would change. If space itself warped slightly, the pendulum's plane of swing would rotate. He worked for hours, the concentration pushing back the weariness. The design evolved as he considered additional factors. A second component, a sealed container of gas with a pressure gauge. Atmospheric pressure changes would indicate thermodynamic instability. A third, a simple electrical circuit with a lodestone, sensitive to electromagnetic disturbances. By midday, he had a complete design, a tripartite reality monitor. Crude by his world standards, but elegant in its simplicity. It wouldn't fix anything, but it would tell him where and how reality was fracturing. He found Alden at the blacksmith's forge, the big man hammering a piece of metal into shape. The rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil had a comforting solidity to it, though Leo noticed the fire's flames occasionally flickered in patterns that defied normal convection currents. Another project? Alden asked without looking up, his voice carrying over the noise. He set the hammer down and turned, wiping sweat from his brow. His expression was guarded but not hostile, a significant improvement from their first meeting. Leo showed him the sketches. I need to build this. It won't be as dramatic as the musket, but it might be more important. Alden studied the drawings, his thick fingers tracing the lines. Monitoring device, he said after a moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. For the instabilities. Yes. I can't sense them directly anymore. Not with my energy depleted. But this might tell us where the weak points are forming. Alden nodded slowly. The materials are simple enough. I have most of them here. The precision work. He looked at Leo. You'll need to guide my hands. I'm better with strength than delicacy. They worked through the afternoon, Leo directing while Alden shaped and assembled. The process was slower than it would have been with proper tools, but Alden's craftsmanship was surprisingly adaptable. He fashioned the pendulum's weight from a small iron sphere, polishing it until it shone. The wire came from a broken musical instrument Marta produced from storage, gut string that was both strong and flexible. The pressure chamber presented more difficulty, but Alden solved it by modifying a small brass container meant for storing herbs, adding a glass viewing window and a needle gauge from an old measuring device. The electrical circuit was the simplest, a copper wire looped around the lodestone, connected to a primitive galvanometer Leo constructed from a compass needle and more wire. As they worked, Alden spoke in his usual gruff manner, but Leo detected underlying concern. Travelers avoid the northern road now, the blacksmith said as he filed edges smooth. Say the shadows move wrong there. Not just dark places where light doesn't reach, but shapes. Like they have substance. Have you seen them yourself? Leo asked, adjusting the pendulum's suspension point. Alden shook his head. No. And I don't want to. But Garin, the woodcutter, swears he saw something in the deep forest 2 days back. A patch of darkness that swallowed sound. He said birds fell silent when they flew near it, and the air went cold. Leo felt the familiar tightening in his chest. These weren't just residual fluctuations. Something was actively exploiting the weaknesses in reality. The Void Weavers, the thought came unbidden, though he didn't know the term yet. Entities that fed on fractures. By evening, the device was complete. It stood about a foot tall, the 3 components arranged around a central column. The pendulum swung with a steady rhythm, the pressure gauge needle held steady, the compass needle pointed true north. For now, all was stable in Oakhaven. Leo set it on a table in his room, watching as the pendulum's swing gradually settled into a consistent period. The minor fluctuations were still there, tiny variations in timing that would be invisible to anyone not looking for them. But they were small. Contained. He was documenting the baseline readings when shouts came from outside. Not the normal sounds of village life ending for the day, but urgent calls. Marta's voice, sharp with command. Others responding with alarm. Leo rushed out, the weariness momentarily forgotten. Villagers were gathering in the central square, their faces illuminated by torchlight as dusk settled. At the center stood a man Leo didn't recognize, travel-stained, breathing heavily as if he'd run for miles. His clothes were of better quality than the villagers, marking him as from a city. Marta reached the man first. "What news?" The messenger bent over, hands on knees, gasping for breath. When he straightened, his face was pale even in the torchlight. From Silver Reach, he managed between breaths. "The city, shadows in the streets. Not cast by anything. Moving on their own. They consume light. Sound. Some say they take people." He looked around at the gathered faces, his eyes wide with something beyond exhaustion, primal fear. "The mages can't stop them. Their spells unravel when they get close. The priest's blessings have no effect." His gaze landed on Leo, seeming to recognize him despite never having met him. "They're spreading. Following the fractures in the world." The messenger swallowed hard, his next words dropping to a whisper that somehow carried through the sudden silence. "And they're moving this way." The morning sun cast long shadows across Oakhaven as Leo shouldered his pack, the weight of it feeling heavier than its physical mass. His body still carried the phantom aches of his sacrifice, a constant, low-grade fatigue that seemed woven into his very bones. The locked divine energy within him remained at that stubborn 3/100, a reservoir sealed shut, leaving him with nothing but his wits and the mundane tools of physics. Marta stood at the village gate, her weathered face etched with concern. "You're sure about this, Leo?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many leave and not enough return. "The messenger said those shadow creatures are moving this way. Oakhaven's walls have held against bandits and beasts, but against something that eats light and sound." Leo adjusted the strap of his pack, feeling the familiar shape of his invention sketchpad tucked safely inside. "The monitoring device shows the anomalies here are contained," he said, his voice quieter than he intended. "But if these fractures are spreading from the Empire's heart outward, I need to see their source. I caused this. However indirectly, my edits opened these doors." He didn't add what he truly felt, the gnawing suspicion that the Void Weavers the messenger described weren't just exploiting random fractures. They were following a trail. His trail. The road beyond Oakhaven unfurled like a dusty ribbon, cutting through fields that should have been vibrant with late summer growth. Instead, Leo found himself walking through a landscape of contradictions. Here, a patch of wheat stood tall and golden, swaying in a breeze that carried the scent of ripe grain. 20 paces further, the same crop lay withered and blackened, as if flash-frozen then burned. No gradual transition, just a sharp line where one reality ended and another began. Magic crops, he realized. The hybrid system Ilera had described was working in patches, but the transition wasn't seamless. Where physics and magic overlapped imperfectly, life suffered. He paused beside a field of luminescent mushrooms that should have glowed with soft blue light. Half of them pulsed rhythmically, their bioluminescence following some deep magical rhythm. The other half had gone dark, their caps shriveled and dry. Between them, a single mushroom flickered erratically, alternating between brilliance and darkness like a faulty bulb. Leo knelt, careful not to touch the fragile fungi. His hand hovered over the flickering specimen, feeling nothing, no heat, no cold, no energy he could detect. Just the visual paradox of something trying to exist in two states at once. He thought of Schrödinger's cat, that old quantum mechanics thought experiment. Here it was made flesh, or rather fungus, caught between magical animation and physical decay. Further along, the wildlife told a similar story. A flock of sky herons passed overhead, their normally graceful formation broken. One bird flew perfectly, its wings cutting clean arcs through the air. Another beside it flapped desperately, as if fighting invisible resistance. A third simply glided, not moving its wings at all, carried by winds that shouldn't have been there at ground level. Leo watched them until they disappeared over a ridge, his physicist's mind cataloging each anomaly. Aerodynamics disrupted. Localized gravity variations. Atmospheric pressure inconsistencies. All contained, as his device had shown, but present. Like scars on reality's skin. By midday, the road joined a broader trade route, its packed earth showing the grooves of countless wagon wheels. The air grew warmer, carrying distant sounds, the creak of wood, the clop of hooves, voices raised in conversation and occasional song. Rounding a bend, Leo came upon the merchant caravan. There were 6 wagons in total, each painted in fading but still vibrant colors, their canvas covers patched in places but sturdy. The lead wagon had come to a halt, its right rear wheel sunk deep into a rut that had partially collapsed. 2 men and a woman stood around it, their expressions ranging from frustration to calculation. "I told you this stretch was washed out last season," the woman said, hands on her hips. She wore practical traveling clothes, but a silver pendant shaped like a balancing scale hung at her throat. "We should have taken the northern fork." "And add 2 days to the journey," countered the older of the 2 men, his beard streaked with gray. "With rumors of shadow eaters spreading?" "No thank you." Leo approached slowly, not wanting to startle them. "Need help?" The younger man, barely more than a boy, really, looked him up and down. "You a wheelwright?" "Physics student," Leo said, then corrected himself. "Was. I understand forces and leverage." He examined the wagon. The rut was about 2 feet deep, the wheel lodged at an angle that put strain on the axle. Simple mechanical advantage problem. He scanned the roadside, spotting a fallen tree branch thick enough to serve as a lever. "If we can lift the wagon just enough to get traction," Leo said, pointing, "we can roll that stone under the wheel as a fulcrum, then use the branch to lift." The woman raised an eyebrow. "You've done this before?" "In theory," Leo admitted. "The equations work." To their credit, they didn't laugh. The older man nodded slowly. "Better than standing here arguing. Kale, get the stone. Lyra, help me with the branch." As they worked, the conversation flowed naturally. The merchants were heading to Silver Reach, same as Leo, carrying textiles from the western provinces. They spoke of the road, of prices, of the strange times. "Heard in Oakhaven they've got some new contraption," the younger man, Kale, said as he rolled the stone into position. "Monitors the world's humors or some such." "Not humors," Leo said, grunting as he positioned the lever. "Physics. Gravity, pressure, electromagnetism." The woman, Lyra, watched him closely. "You sound like you've been listening to the legends. The god of physics stories." Leo's hand stilled for a moment. "Legends? Oh, it's all the talk in the taverns," the older man said, wiping sweat from his brow. "They say some deity from beyond the stars came and rewrote the rules of the world. Fixed the rain that was falling up, made the sky stop bleeding light. Some say he's a savior. Others say he's the reason the shadows are waking. Which do you believe?" Leo asked, his voice carefully neutral. Lyra shrugged. "I believe my scales. They balance or they don't. The world's been unbalanced since the great anomalies started. If some god tried to fix it." She trailed off, watching as Leo positioned the lever. "Well, fixing one thing often breaks another. That's merchant wisdom." With coordinated effort, they lifted the wagon. The wood groaned, the lever bending slightly but holding. Kale shoved wedges under the wheel, then larger stones to build a ramp. When they lowered it, the wagon sat firm, ready to be pulled forward. "Clever work," the older man said, clapping Leo on the shoulder. "Name's Borin. This is my daughter Lyra and my apprentice Kale. You heading to Silver Reach?" Leo nodded. "Heard there's trouble there." "Trouble everywhere," Borin said grimly. "But Silver Reach sits on 3 ley lines. If the world's fracturing, that's where it'll show first." They offered him supplies in thanks, dried meat, hard cheese, a water skin. Leo tried to refuse, but Lyra insisted. "A fair trade," she said, her merchant soul satisfied. "Your knowledge for our goods. The world needs more of that kind of commerce." As the caravan rolled onward, Borin called back, "If you make it to Silver Reach, look for the Gilded Scale Tavern. Tell them Borin sent you. They'll give you honest rates." Leo watched them disappear around a bend, the weight of the supplies in his pack feeling different now. Not just food, but an exchange. A connection. He was no longer just a student from another world, or even a reluctant deity. He was becoming part of this world's economy, its stories, its struggles. The afternoon wore on, the road climbing gradually into foothills. The anomalies grew more frequent. Once, he passed a stream where water flowed uphill for 10 paces before resuming its normal course. Another time, he saw a cluster of floating rocks, suspended in mid-air as if gravity had forgotten them. They rotated slowly, silently, in a delicate ballet that defied everything he knew about mass and attraction. He took out his invention sketchpad, making notes. Not designs this time, but observations. The floating rocks, were they caught in a localized gravity well, or was spacetime itself warped there? The uphill water, a pressure differential, or something subtler? His locked divine energy hummed faintly, like a phone on silent in another room. He could sense the fractures, even if he couldn't mend them. As dusk approached, Leo found a clearing off the road, sheltered by a stand of pine trees whose needles whispered in the evening breeze. He built a small fire, careful to keep it contained, and ate some of the dried meat. The taste was smoky and salty, unfamiliar but not unpleasant. Night in the magical world was different than he remembered from his brief visits. The stars here weren't just points of light, they pulsed with subtle colors, blues and violets and deep reds, as if each contained a miniature sun burning with magical energy. The moon, when it rose, had a faint silver halo, a visible manifestation of lunar magic. Or it should have. Leo frowned, squinting upward. Directly overhead, a patch of sky seemed wrong. The stars there didn't pulse. They shone steady and cold, like the stars of his own world. And the moon's halo cut off abruptly at the edges of this patch, as if someone had drawn a circle and said, "Here, physics rules." He stood, his food forgotten. The air in the clearing grew still. The pine needles stopped whispering. The night insects fell silent. A low hum began, so deep it was more vibration than sound. It came from the center of the clearing, where the grass lay flat in a perfect circle 20 feet across. The blades began to shimmer, not with dew or moonlight, but with a distortion that hurt Leo's eyes to look at directly. Like heat haze, but colder. Much colder. The temperature dropped sharply. Leo's breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air. Frost spiderwebbed across the grass, radiating from the circle's center. Then the gravity went wrong. It wasn't a failure, not like in Oakhaven where things had floated briefly. This was something active, malicious. The grass within the circle didn't just lie flat. It pressed downward, blades snapping under pressure that visibly warped the air. Dirt compacted. Stones cracked with sharp reports. Leo stumbled back, his own body feeling alternately too heavy and too light as the effect spilled beyond the circle's edges. His ears popped with pressure changes. A rift. The messenger had described them, but words failed to capture the reality. This wasn't a tear in fabric. It was a wound in the laws of existence. Physics itself was bleeding here. And from that wound, shadows emerged. They didn't step or crawl. They unfolded, like darkness given form and intention. 3 of them, humanoid but wrong, limbs too long, proportions distorted. They had no faces, just smoother darkness where features should be. Where they moved, light died. The moonlight didn't touch them. The fire's glow didn't reach them. They consumed illumination, leaving afterimages of deeper black. One turned toward Leo. He felt rather than saw its attention, a pressure against his mind, cold and hungry. It didn't see with eyes. It perceived with something that tasted the fractures in reality, and Leo realized with dawning horror that he glowed to them. His locked divine energy, his connection to the Deus ex Machina, his very presence as the one who had edited this world's physics, he was a beacon in the darkness. The Void Weaver took a step forward. The grass beneath its foot didn't bend. It unraveled, turning to dust that lost even its color, becoming a gray nothingness. Leo backed away slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. He had no divine energy to spend. No reality edits to make. Just a sketchpad, some supplies, and the desperate, clinging knowledge that he had helped make these things possible. The other 2 shadow figures turned as well. They began to spread out, moving with that unnatural unfolding gait, surrounding him. The hum deepened. The cold intensified. And in the center of the rift, the distortion shimmered, promising more to come. The gravity rift pulsed before Leo like a wound in reality itself. It wasn't simply a tear in space, it was a violent contradiction of physics, a place where fundamental laws warred against each other. The air around it shimmered with impossible gradients. One moment it was so dense Leo could barely breathe, the next it thinned to near vacuum. Temperature swung from searing heat to biting cold in seconds, creating ghostly condensation patterns that formed and dissolved in the same breath. Leo's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. The Deus Ex Machina app flickered to life, its interface dimmer than he remembered. The divine energy counter still read 3/100, a pitiful remnant of what he'd once commanded. He focused the device's sensors on the rift, watching as data streamed across the screen. Reality fracture detected, the app displayed. Localized spacetime curvature anomaly. Gravity variance, plus or minus 47% baseline. Atmospheric pressure fluctuations, 0.3 to 3.2 atmospheres. Thermodynamic instability, critical. Source, physics edit residual energy interacting with magical substrate. The Void Weavers moved with a silence that felt heavier than sound. There were 3 of them, though counting them was difficult, their forms seemed to shift at the edges, as if they existed partially in dimensions Leo couldn't perceive. They weren't merely shadowy, they were absences, places where light didn't just fail to reflect but was actively consumed. Where they passed, the night grew darker, the stars above seeming to dim as though something drank their light. Leo's breath caught in his throat. He could feel their attention like a physical pressure, a cold awareness that settled on his skin. They weren't looking at him, they were looking through him, at something deeper. The app in his hand. The connection to the edits he'd made. They could sense it, he realized with dawning horror. They were drawn to the fractures his actions had created, like scavengers to a fresh kill. The nearest weaver drifted closer. It had no discernible features, just a humanoid silhouette that seemed to unravel at the edges, threads of darkness peeling away and reforming. Where its feet, if it had feet, touched the ground, the grass didn't bend. It simply ceased to exist, leaving behind patches of bare earth that looked unnaturally smooth, as if the very concept of texture had been erased. Leo's mind raced through physics principles. Pressure differentials. Temperature gradients. Electromagnetic fields. He had so little energy left, just 3 points. A single significant edit might drain him completely. But the weavers were closing in, and the rift behind them continued to pulse, growing slightly larger with each heartbeat. He focused on the air. The app's interface showed the pressure fluctuations around the rift, wild, chaotic swings that created miniature wind currents. Leo selected a small area directly in front of the approaching weaver. With a thought and a tap, he spent 1 point of divine energy. The change was subtle but immediate. The air in that specific 3-meter sphere stabilized at exactly 1 atmosphere, creating a pocket of normalcy in the chaotic field. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the weaver hesitated. Its form seemed to ripple, the edges becoming less defined. It was like watching smoke react to a sudden breeze. The entity's substance appeared to resist the stabilized physics, as if the consistency of reality itself was uncomfortable to it. But it didn't stop. It simply adjusted, flowing around the stabilized zone like water around a rock. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He needed something more direct. The second weaver was approaching from his left. Leo watched as it passed near a small bush. The plant didn't wither, it unraveled. Leaves dissolved into faint motes of light that were immediately consumed. Branches lost their structure, becoming formless before vanishing entirely. It wasn't destruction. It was unmaking. Leo switched tactics. Instead of stabilizing, he would create a gradient. He selected a narrow corridor between himself and the weaver, spending his second point of energy. The app responded, and the air pressure in that corridor dropped sharply from ground level upward, creating a sudden vertical differential. The effect was more pronounced. The weaver entering the zone seemed to stumble, though stumble wasn't quite right. Its form compressed slightly, as if the changing pressure exerted a force on its non-corporeal body. Dark tendrils lashed out, not at Leo but at the air itself, as if trying to tear the physics alteration apart. For a precious few seconds, it was occupied. Leo backed away, his eyes darting between the 3 entities. The rift behind them was growing more active. Strange lights flickered within it, not colors, but negative colors, hues that hurt to look at because they seemed to represent the absence of visible spectrum. The temperature swings became more violent, and Leo felt frost form on his jacket one moment, then evaporate in a puff of steam the next. The third weaver was smarter. It didn't approach directly. Instead, it began circling, moving in a wide arc that would eventually put it behind Leo, cutting off his retreat. They were learning. Adapting. Leo's hand tightened around his phone. 1 point left. Just 1. He could feel the device growing warm in his hand, as if straining against whatever forces the weavers exerted on reality. The app's display flickered, interference from their presence. The circling weaver was almost behind him now. Leo made a decision. He wouldn't try to affect the weaver directly. He'd affect the environment around it. He selected a patch of ground 10 meters to his right, an area the weaver would need to cross to complete its encirclement. With his final point of divine energy, he altered the local gravity. Not by much. Just a 20% increase. But it was enough. The ground in that area suddenly became heavier. Not the earth itself, but the gravitational pull on it. The weaver passing through the zone slowed dramatically, its shadowy form seeming to sink into the ground as if walking through thick mud. It struggled, tendrils of darkness whipping about as it tried to pull itself free from the enhanced gravity. Now was his chance. Leo turned and ran, not away from the rift but parallel to it, keeping distance from all three entities. His lungs burned with the effort, and the chaotic physics around the rift made running treacherous. One moment the ground felt normal, the next it was like slogging through water as local gravity spiked. He'd almost cleared the rift's immediate area when the first weaver recovered. It didn't chase him physically. Instead, it raised a hand, or something that served as a hand, and made a tearing motion in the air. Space itself rippled. Not like the rift, but a smaller, focused distortion that raced toward Leo. He dove to the side, feeling the air where he'd been standing grow suddenly, impossibly cold. Frost crystals formed in mid-air, then shattered into nothingness. The weaver was learning to use the fractured physics against him. Leo scrambled to his feet, continuing his retreat. He needed to get clear, to put distance between himself and these things. But as he ran, he noticed something on his phone's screen. The energy reading wasn't just at 1/100 anymore. It was fluctuating. 1, 0. 1, 0. Something was interfering with the app's ability to measure divine energy. Or something was actively draining what little he had left. He risked a glance back. The weaver he'd trapped with increased gravity had freed itself, but it left something behind, a dark residue on the ground where it had struggled. The substance looked like spilled ink, but it moved against the wind, creeping slowly across the earth. And where it passed, the grass didn't just die. It became something else, a gray, featureless material that reflected no light. The residue was spreading toward him. Leo changed direction, angling away from the creeping darkness. His mind raced. The weavers weren't just entities, they were vectors. They carried with them a corruption that transformed reality itself, turning ordered physics into something else. Something alien. The two other weavers were converging now, moving to cut off his escape. They'd learned from his tricks. When Leo tried to create another pressure differential, they simply flowed around it, their forms adapting to the changed physics with disturbing speed. He was running out of options. Out of energy. Out of space to retreat. That's when new lights appeared on the horizon. Not the strange negative lights of the rift, but familiar magical glows, soft blues and golds that illuminated the night with gentle radiance. Two figures approached through the trees, moving with purpose. Leo froze. He recognized the lead figure even at this distance. The flowing robes, the staff that glowed with inner light, the confident stride. Archmage Elara. And beside her, the younger mage Corin, his face tense with concentration as he scanned the area with some kind of detection spell. They hadn't seen him yet. Their attention was fixed on the rift, on the Void Weavers. Elara raised her staff, and the air hummed with gathering magical energy. Corin began tracing symbols in the air, his movements precise and practiced. But then Corin's head turned. His detection spell must have picked up something else. Something besides the rift and the weavers. His eyes scanned the darkness, passed over Leo's position once, then snapped back. Their eyes met across the clearing. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stop. Leo saw the recognition dawn on Corin's face, not just recognition of a person, but of what he represented. The source of the anomalies. The god of physics. Then Corin's mouth opened, and he called out to Elara, pointing directly at Leo. The Archmage's head turned. Her gaze, sharp and intelligent, found Leo in the darkness. There was no anger in her expression. No surprise either. Just cold, analytical assessment. She took in the scene, Leo standing between the Void Weavers and the rift, his phone still glowing in his hand, the reality fracture pulsing behind him. Her staff didn't lower. If anything, the magical energy around it intensified. She said something to Corin, too quiet for Leo to hear at this distance. The younger mage nodded, his own focus splitting between the weavers and the man they'd been hunting for weeks. Leo stood trapped between two threats, the alien entities that wanted to unmake reality itself, and the mages who wanted to stop the one they believed was breaking it. Leo's breath came in ragged gasps as he slipped through the crowded streets of Silverreach, the city's stone walls looming like jagged teeth against a sky streaked with unnatural hues. The air hummed with a low, dissonant vibration, a remnant of the gravity rift he'd fled, now echoing through the urban sprawl. His divine energy, a flickering 1 out of 100 in a Deus Ex Machina app, felt like a dying ember in his chest, each heartbeat a reminder of how close he'd come to depletion. Behind him, the distant shouts of Archmage Alara and her apprentice Corrin faded into the cacophony of panic, but their pursuit was a ghost at his heels, a threat woven into the very fabric of the city's chaos. Silver Reach was a tapestry of desperation. Market stalls lay overturned, their wares scattered across cobblestones slick with spilled ale and rainwater. Citizens huddled in doorways, their faces etched with fear as they pointed at shimmering distortions in the air, reality fractures, small but potent, where physics laws twisted like broken glass. In one alley, a gravity anomaly had pinned a cart to a wall, its wheels spinning uselessly against an invisible force. In another, a pressure drop had frozen a fountain solid, ice crystals creeping up its stone basin. Leo's eyes darted, cataloging each disruption, the failed spells of mages trying to mend tears in the world, the erratic flicker of magical lanterns as electromagnetic disturbances shorted their enchantments. He moved with the fluidity of a shadow, his worn traveler's cloak pulled tight, blending into the throng of merchants, soldiers, and refugees streaming through the gates. The city's architecture, a blend of Gothic spires and timbered houses, seemed to groan under the strain, its foundations whispering of deeper rifts beneath the surface. His mind raced, a torrent of calculations and regrets. The Void Weaver's dark residue from the clearing had spread, he realized, seeping into the ley lines that crisscrossed the empire like veins of magical energy. Each fracture they exploited was a wound he'd inadvertently opened with his physics edits, a consequence of playing God with reality's laws. He thought of Oakhaven, of Marta's weary eyes and Alden's trust, and a cold knot tightened in his stomach. He couldn't afford to be caught, not by the mages who saw him as a heretic, nor by the weavers who fed on his mistakes. Sliding into a narrow alcove behind a smithy, the heat of the forge a welcome contrast to the chill in his bones, Leo pulled out his invention sketchpad. The leather-bound tool felt heavy in his hands, its pages filled with diagrams of tripartite monitors and leverage systems. Now, he needed something more, a blueprint to seal the rifts, to stitch reality back together before the weavers consumed it whole. He sketched frantically, his fingers trembling as he translated physics principles into tangible design. The device would be a convergence engine, he decided, a cylindrical core of copper and iron, wired to harness local electromagnetic fields, with a pendulum array to stabilize gravity and a pressure valve to equalize thermodynamic imbalances. It was crude, born of desperation, but it leveraged the same scientific laws the weavers unraveled. As he worked, the sounds of the city swelled around him, a child's cry, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the distant roar of a rift tearing open in the merchant district. Smoke billowed into the sky, tinged with the acrid scent of ozone. Leo finished the blueprint, his breath fogging the paper, and knew he couldn't build it alone. His divine energy was too low to power it directly, he needed hands, resources, knowledge. Pushing back into the street, Leo made for the city's engineering quarter, a district of workshops and tinkerers nestled against the northern wall. Here, the chaos was more controlled, but no less dire. Engineers in oil-stained aprons argued over malfunctioning steam engines, their gears jammed by pressure fluctuations. In one workshop, a burly man with graying hair and calloused hands, Gareth, a local engineer Leo overheard being called, was cursing over a shattered crystal lens, its magical enhancements failed by electromagnetic interference. Leo approached cautiously, the blueprint held out like an offering. "I have a design," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his limbs. "It can detect and seal the rifts. But I need help to build it." Gareth eyed him with a mix of suspicion and curiosity, his gaze lingering on the intricate diagrams. "You're that traveler they're whispering about, the one with the strange tools. What's your price?" "Information," Leo replied, leaning in. "Tell me about the ley lines in this region. Where are the nexuses, the weak points? The rifts are feeding on them, and if we don't act, Silver Reach will be swallowed whole." A tense silence hung between them, broken by the crackle of a nearby rift distorting the light. Garrett's expression shifted from doubt to grim resolve. He took the blueprint, his fingers tracing the copper coils. "I've seen these fractures spreading from the countryside," he muttered. "They follow the old ley lines, like cracks in a pane of glass. There's a major nexus 3 days' travel east, a convergence point where magical energy pools. If the shadows you speak of reach it," he trailed off, shaking his head. "I'll gather my apprentices. We'll build your engine. But you stay and oversee it. No tricks." Leo nodded, relief washing over him like a tide. For the next few hours, he worked alongside Gareth and 2 apprentices, a young woman named Alara, no relation to the Archmage, with keen eyes for circuitry, and a lanky boy called Finn who handled the metalwork. The workshop became a hive of activity, the clatter of tools and hiss of soldering irons a symphony against the city's dissonance. Leo explained the physics behind each component, how the pendulum would dampen gravity waves, how the pressure valve would bleed off thermodynamic instability. As they assembled the engine, its form taking shape like a strange, mechanical heart, he felt a flicker of hope, not divine, but human, forged in collaboration. But hope was a fragile thing in a city under siege. As dusk settled, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, the sound of chanting echoed from the main thoroughfare. Leo peered out the workshop's grimy window, his blood running cold. A procession of priests in blue robes, led by a familiar stern-faced man, Brother Kalen, priest of Aquaria, marched through the streets, their voices rising in a hymn to the water goddess. They carried relics, urns of blessed water, sigils etched with hydrological spells. Kalen's eyes scanned the crowd, sharp and unyielding, his purpose clear. He was hunting the source of the disruptions, and his gaze seemed to pierce through the chaos, seeking the one who tampered with the world's laws. Leo ducked back, his heart hammering against his ribs. The rift-sealing engine was nearly complete, a silent promise of salvation, but now another threat closed in. He glanced at Gareth, who had paused his work, a wary look in his eyes. "Priests of Aquaria," Gareth whispered. "They've been questioning everyone about the anomalies. If they find you here." Outside, Kalen's voice cut through the din, commanding and cold. "By the grace of Aquaria, we seek the one who fractures reality. Surrender the heretic, and the goddess's mercy may yet spare this city." The crowd parted, some bowing in reverence, others shrinking back in fear. Leo's hand went to the Deus Ex Machina app, its screen glitching with interference, the divine energy reading a precarious 1/100. He was trapped between the priest's righteous hunt and the Void Weaver's hunger, the city's fate balanced on a knife's edge. In the workshop's dim light, the rift-sealing engine gleamed, unfinished and untested, a tool for mending a world he'd broken, if only he could survive long enough to use it. The ley line Nexus shimmered 3 miles east of Silver Reach, a convergence point where magical energy pooled like liquid light beneath the Earth's surface. Leo followed Gareth's directions through rocky foothills, the air growing thick with ozone and the faint hum of power. His boots crunched on gravel that seemed to vibrate with each step, tiny stones trembling as if the ground itself were breathing. The sky above held an unnatural clarity, too blue, too sharp, as though reality had been polished thin at this location. He climbed a final ridge, sweat cooling on his neck despite the chill that permeated the area. Below, in a shallow valley between two granite outcrops, the Nexus revealed itself. It wasn't a single point but rather a network of glowing fractures in the earth, pulsing with soft blue-white light that illuminated the surrounding rocks. The fractures formed intricate patterns, like lightning frozen in stone, converging toward a central pool of energy that swirled with colors Leo couldn't name, shades that hurt to look at directly, wavelengths that shouldn't exist in normal physics. But the beauty was being consumed. 3 Void Weavers moved through the Nexus, their shadowy forms flowing like ink through water. They didn't walk so much as drift, their elongated limbs trailing darkness that drank the ley line's light. Where they passed, the fractures dimmed, the hum of power dropping to a sickly whisper. Leo counted them from his vantage point, 3, just like at the gravity rift, but these seemed larger, more substantial, as though feeding had made them stronger. He crouched behind a boulder, his breath fogging in air that grew colder the closer he got to the Nexus. The Deus Ex Machina app on his mental interface flickered, its display unstable. Divine energy, 1/100. The number wavered, sometimes showing 0, sometimes 1, as though the Nexus's magical field interfered with whatever mechanism measured his power. He had nothing to spend, no reserves to manipulate physics on any meaningful scale. Yet he had to do something. The Nexus wasn't just a magical curiosity, Gareth had explained it stabilized the region's reality. If the Void Weavers consumed it entirely, the fractures would spread, reality would unravel, and Silver Reach would be the first casualty in a chain reaction that could collapse physics across the Empire. Leo opened his invention sketchpad, the mental tool responding more reliably than the app. He began sketching, not a complex machine this time, but a simple electromagnetic trap. The principles were basic: create a localized magnetic field strong enough to disrupt the Weaver's shadowy forms. They consumed light, yes, but Gareth's observation suggested they were sensitive to electromagnetic disturbances, the way they avoided areas where reality fractures caused electrical discharges. The problem was power. The trap needed energy to generate the field, and Leo had none to spare. His eyes scanned the Nexus, tracing the ley line's glow. Magical energy. Could he harness it? The app was designed to manipulate physics, not magic, but electromagnetic fields were physics. If he could create a conductor that channeled ley line energy into an electromagnetic coil. He descended the ridge carefully, keeping low, moving from rock to rock. The Void Weavers seemed focused on their feeding, their attention absorbed by the energy they consumed. One drifted near the central pool, dipping a hand-like appendage into the swirling colors. Where it touched, the colors darkened, turning gray and lifeless. Leo reached the edge of the fracture network. Up close, the ley lines hummed with tangible force, making his teeth ache. He could feel the energy in his bones, a vibration that resonated with something deep in his consciousness. The app flickered again, showing strange readings, local gravity fluctuations, atmospheric pressure anomalies, temperature gradients that defied thermodynamics. The Nexus was a knot of reality where magic and physics tangled. He found what he needed near a smaller fracture, veins of iron rich or running through the rock. Using a sharp stone, he began scraping at them, breaking off chunks of magnetite. His hands worked quickly, the cold making his fingers stiff. He arranged the magnetite in a rough circle around one of the fractures, positioning each piece to create a crude magnetic field when energized. Next, he needed a conductor. His pack yielded little, some copper wire salvaged from Silverreach's workshops, a few metal tools. He twisted the wire into a coil, connecting it to the magnetite arrangement. The design was primitive, something a first-year physics student might cobble together for a demonstration, but it followed the principles: magnetic field generation through electrical current. Now for the dangerous part. He extended a length of wire toward the ley line fracture. The glowing energy crackled as the copper approached, arcs of blue-white light dancing along the metal. Leo held his breath, expecting an explosion, but the energy flowed into the wire, traveling along its length toward the coil. The magnetite began to hum, vibrating against the rock. A magnetic field formed, invisible but tangible. The air within the circle warped, light bending strangely. One of the Void Weavers paused its feeding, turning its featureless head toward the disturbance. Leo ducked lower, heart pounding. The Weaver drifted closer, curious, its shadowy form rippling as it approached the magnetic field. It entered the circle. Instantly, the Weaver shuddered, its form becoming less substantial, more diffuse. It didn't retreat but seemed confused, its feeding interrupted. The magnetic field wasn't strong enough to harm it, Leo could see that immediately, but it created a zone of discomfort, a place where the Weaver's connection to reality became unstable. He needed more. One Weaver distracted wasn't enough. The other two continued feeding, and the central pool's glow was dimming visibly now, whole sections turning gray and inert. Leo moved to another fracture, repeating the process. His hands shook from cold and adrenaline. The second trap took longer, the magnetite was harder to position, the wire less cooperative. As he worked, he kept glancing at the Weavers, watching their progress. They were methodical, efficient, consuming the Nexus with terrifying speed. The second magnetic field activated just as the first Weaver began to adapt, its form solidifying again as it grew accustomed to the disturbance. Both Weavers now hovered at the edges of their respective traps, hesitant to enter but no longer feeding. They turned toward each other, communicating in some silent way, their shadowy forms rippling in unison. One remained at the central pool, continuing its consumption. Leo had bought time, not stopped them. He was positioning materials for a third trap when the ground shuddered. A new fracture opened near the central pool, jagged and violent, tearing through rock with a sound like shattering glass. Reality itself seemed to crack at that point, the air above the fracture distorting into prismatic fragments. The Void Weaver there didn't retreat, it moved toward the new fracture, drawn to the instability. Leo's app flashed a warning: reality integrity, 62% and dropping. The numbers scrolled downward, 61%, 60%, as the fractures multiplied. The Nexus wasn't just being consumed, it was being destabilized, its structure unraveling under the Weaver's influence. He abandoned the third trap, moving instead toward the central pool. If he could disrupt the feeding there, even temporarily, it might slow the collapse. His mind raced through options. The magnetic fields worked, but they required setup time he didn't have. What else? The Weavers consumed light, but they seemed anchored to reality fractures. What if he could? A voice cut through the hum of the Nexus. Stop right there. Leo froze, halfway to the central pool. He knew that voice, calm, authoritative, edged with controlled anger. He turned slowly. Archmage Alara stood at the ridge's edge, her robes stirring in the unnatural breeze that swirled around the Nexus. Corrin stood beside her, detection spells glowing around his hands. They had followed him, tracking the magical disturbances to their source. Alara descended the slope, her movements precise, each step placed with deliberate care. Her eyes didn't leave Leo, but she took in the scene, the void weavers, the magnetic traps, the fracturing Nexus. Her expression tightened, the controlled anger giving way to something colder, more dangerous. "What have you done?" she asked, her voice carrying over the hum of dying ley lines. Leo opened his mouth to explain, but the ground shuddered again. Another fracture opened, this one between him and Alara, tearing the earth apart with a roar of displaced stone. The fracture glowed with unstable energy, reality peeling back at its edges to reveal glimpses of nothingness. Pure void. The central pool darkened further, its colors bleeding to gray. The void weaver there raised its head, sensing new presences. It turned toward Alara and Corrin, its form swelling with consumed energy. Alara's eyes narrowed. "Answer me," she demanded, ignoring the weaver, ignoring the fracturing world around them. "What have you done?" The Nexus groaned, a sound of structural failure on a cosmic scale. Cracks spread through the air itself, prismatic shards of broken reality floating where space should be solid. The void weavers began to converge, drawn by the escalating instability. And Leo stood between them all, the collapsing Nexus, the hungry entities, and the Archmage who wanted answers he couldn't give without revealing everything. The ley line Nexus pulsed with sickly energy, casting jagged shadows that seemed to twist and writhe independent of their sources. Leo stood frozen, the electromagnetic trap in his hands forgotten as Archmage Alara's piercing gaze locked onto him. Her robes, embroidered with silver constellations that normally glowed with magical light, hung dull and lifeless in the fractured reality. "You," Alara said, her voice cutting through the low hum of the Nexus's decay. "The source of all this." Behind her, Corrin fumbled with a detection crystal that flickered erratically, its readings jumping between magical signatures and something else, something that made the young mage's hands tremble. The three void weavers continued their slow, methodical feeding, their shadowy forms drinking in the ley line's energy like black holes consuming light. Leo's mind raced. His divine energy readout on the Deus Ex Machina app flickered between 0 and 1, the interference from the fractures making it impossible to trust. 1 point. That was all he had left, and using it could mean the difference between survival and being consumed by the very entities he'd inadvertently unleashed. "They're called Void Weavers," Leo said, his voice steadier than he felt. He gestured with the half-assembled trap toward the entities. "They feed on reality fractures, tears in the fabric of existence caused when my physics edits interact with your magical substrate." Alara's eyes narrowed. "Physics edits?" The word sounded foreign on her tongue, as if speaking them contaminated the air. "You speak of overriding natural laws as if describing the weather." A sudden tremor shook the ground. One of the fractures near the Nexus widened, revealing a glimpse of swirling nothingness that made Leo's stomach lurch. The void weaver closest to it extended a tendril of shadow into the gap, and the fracture stabilized, but at the cost of the surrounding grass turning to gray ash. "See that?" Leo pointed, his hand trembling slightly. "They're not just feeding, they're stabilizing the fractures to create permanent footholds. Every time they do, reality unravels a little more." Corrin took a step forward, his detection crystal now glowing with a sickly purple light. "Archmage, the readings, they match the anomalies from Oakhaven. The gravity fluctuations, the pressure drops, it's all connected." Alara didn't take her eyes off Leo. "And you claim these creatures are the result of your meddling?" "Not intentionally," Leo said, frustration bleeding into his voice. "When I adjust physics variables, gravity, atmospheric pressure, electromagnetic fields, the changes ripple through reality. But where magic exists, those ripples create fractures. The weavers emerge from those fractures. They're drawn to the instability like moths to flame." He pulled out his invention sketchpad, flipping to the pages where he documented the rift in Silverreach. The diagrams showed pressure gradients, gravitational anomalies, and the dark residue the weavers left behind. "I've been tracking them. Studying them. They consume light, unravel molecular bonds, and they're getting stronger with every fracture they stabilize." Another tremor, stronger this time. The ground cracked open 10 feet to their left, and a fourth void weaver began to coalesce from the emerging darkness. It was smaller than the others, its form less defined, but its hunger was palpable, a cold, sucking emptiness that made the air feel thin. Elara finally looked away from Leo, her attention shifting to the new threat. She raised her hands, and silver light gathered at her fingertips, but the spell fizzled, the magical energy dissipating before it could form. The fractures were interfering with her magic too. Your spells won't work properly here, Leo said, watching the failed casting. The reality integrity is too low. Magic requires stable laws to function, and right now, the laws are flexible. He activated his app, the interface glowing faintly on his device's screen. The reality integrity reading flashed, 58%. Dropping. He zoomed in on the local area, mapping the fractures in real time. Dozens of them spiderwebbed out from the Nexus, each one a potential entry point for more weavers. I can show you, Leo said, turning the device so Elara could see. The map displayed the fractures as red lines against a topographic layout of the area. Every one of these is a weak point. And they're spreading. Elara studied the display, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing, her eyes tracing the pattern of fractures. Then, your device. It detects these anomalies. It analyzes physics variables, Leo explained. When those variables deviate from baseline, when gravity fluctuates or pressure drops unexpectedly, it registers as an anomaly. The fractures show up as concentrations of deviation. Corin moved closer, peering at the screen. It's like a magical detection spell, but different. It doesn't read mana or ley lines. It reads, what? The fabric of reality itself, Leo said. Or rather, the stresses on that fabric. A scream of rending metal echoed through the clearing as one of the Void Weavers finished consuming a section of the Nexus's energy. The ley lines glow dimmed noticeably, and the air grew colder. Leo's app flashed a warning, reality integrity at 55%. We don't have much time, Leo said, his voice urgent. If they consume enough of the Nexus, the fractures will become permanent. The entire region could become unstable. Elara's gaze shifted between Leo, the Weavers, and the dying Nexus. Her decision hung in the air, tangible as the growing cold. Finally, she lowered her hands completely, the last vestiges of her attempted spell fading away. A temporary arrangement, she said, each word measured and precise. You will use your device to map these fractures. I will provide what magical insight I can. But understand this, you are still responsible for this catastrophe. This changes nothing about your culpability. Leo nodded, relief washing through him followed immediately by renewed tension. An alliance, however temporary, was better than fighting on two fronts. But he could see the distrust in Elara's eyes, the calculation. She was using him as much as he was using her. Corin, Elara said without turning. Monitor the perimeter. Alert us if more approach. The young mage hesitated, his eyes darting to Leo before he bowed slightly and moved to the edge of the clearing, his detection crystal held before him like a shield. Leo returned to his app, zooming in on the most concentrated cluster of fractures. There, he said, pointing to a spot about 50 yards east of the Nexus. The fractures are converging. If I'm reading this right, that's where they'll try to establish a permanent anchor point. Elara followed his gesture, her eyes narrowing. I sense a thinning there. As if reality is wearing through like old cloth. Together, they moved cautiously toward the spot, keeping low to avoid drawing the Weaver's attention. The ground grew increasingly unstable, with patches of earth that felt spongy and insubstantial underfoot. In one place, Leo's foot sank through what appeared to be solid ground, revealing a glimpse of swirling gray nothingness beneath before he pulled back. Careful, Elara said, her hand shooting out to steady him. The contact was brief, professional, but Leo felt the strength in her grip, and the coldness. They reached the convergence point. The air shimmered like heat haze, but cold instead of hot. Colors bled at the edges of Leo's vision, and sounds became distorted, echoing as if through water. His app showed reality integrity at 52% in this specific location. This is worse than I thought, Leo murmured, studying the readings. The fractures aren't just surface level. They're propagating through multiple dimensional layers. Sealing them will require. He trailed off, his mind working through the physics. Pressure equalization. Gravitational anchoring. Both would require divine energy he didn't have. The convergence engine design from Silver Reach might work, but building it here, now, with the Weavers actively feeding. Elara raised her hands again, this time not to cast but to sense. Silver light gathered around her fingers, not as a spell but as a diagnostic tool. It flowed outward in delicate tendrils, probing the fractures. Where it touched the unstable areas, it frayed and dissipated. The magical substrate is torn, she said, her voice tight with what might have been pain or revulsion. It's like watching a living thing bleed. These fractures aren't just holes in reality, they're wounds in the world's magic. Leo's app pinged. A new fracture was forming, this one different from the others. The readings showed not just deviation from baseline physics, but something else, a pattern, almost intelligent in its structure. They're not random, he realized aloud. The fractures. The weavers are directing them. Shaping them. Before Elara could respond, Corrin came running back, his face pale. Archmage, he gasped, skidding to a stop. Scrying reports from the northern observatories. The star gods, they're mobilizing. Elara's head snapped up. Mobilizing? Against the weavers? Corrin shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. No. Against him. He pointed at Leo. They've identified the source of the orbital disruptions. They're calling it the physics blasphemer. They view him as a greater threat than the Void Weavers. A fleet of celestial chariots has been sighted heading this way. The words hung in the cold air. Leo felt his blood run colder than the fractured ground beneath his feet. The star gods. Angered by his orbital edits. Now coming for him, while Void Weavers fed on the dying Nexus, while reality unraveled around them. Elara turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the shifting light of the dying ley line. The temporary alliance, fragile as it was, now faced a new dimension of complication. They stood at the convergence of fractures, surrounded by feeding entities, with celestial forces descending, and Leo at the center of it all, with one point of divine energy and a world that wanted him dead for saving it. The ground trembled again, deeper this time, as if in anticipation of what was to come. The mining town of Ironvein lay nestled in a valley of jagged stone, its entrance marked by a massive iron gate that had once gleamed but now showed patches of rust. Leo walked beside Archmage Elara along the rough-hewn road, the crunch of gravel under their boots echoing in the morning air. To his left, Corrin followed a few paces behind, his eyes scanning the surrounding cliffs with a mage's wariness. Leo's mind kept returning to the Deus Ex Machina app interface that floated in his peripheral vision. The divine energy counter remained stubbornly at 1 out of 100, but now it flickered erratically, sometimes showing 0, sometimes 2, before settling back to 1. The interference from the reality fractures was getting worse. He could feel it in the air itself, a subtle wrongness, like listening to music slightly out of tune. The fractures propagate through 7-dimensional layers, Elara said, her voice cutting through his thoughts. She held up a hand, and a complex magical diagram shimmered into existence above her palm. Your mapping was accurate, but incomplete. The fractures aren't just wounds, they're pathways. The Void Weavers are using them to navigate between realities. Leo studied the diagram. The fractures branched like lightning frozen in mid-strike, intersecting at nodes that pulsed with unstable energy. We need to seal them at the convergence points, he said. But my energy reserves are insufficient. Thus our need for materials, Elara replied, dismissing the diagram with a wave. Ironvein produces the purest magnetite in the region, and their copper smelters are renowned. With proper components, we can build devices that channel ambient magical energy to reinforce reality's fabric. As they approached the town gate, Leo noticed the signs of disruption. A cart lay overturned near the entrance, its contents, crates of or samples, spilled across the ground. 2 men struggled to right it, their movements hampered by sudden shifts in weight as local gravity fluctuated. One moment they strained against impossible heaviness, the next they nearly launched the cart into the air as gravity lightened. Steady now, called one of the men, his face slick with sweat. It's the damned magic failures again. Leo approached without thinking. He pulled the invention sketchpad from his pack, a simple leather-bound book that transformed his physics knowledge into practical blueprints. Flipping to a blank page, he began sketching even as he walked. Your cart's center of mass is too high, he said. And the wheel alignment. Who are you? The second man snapped, eyeing Leo's strange clothing, the remnants of his student hoodie and jeans, now patched and worn. Before Leo could answer, gravity shifted again. The cart's front wheels lifted off the ground, threatening to flip backward. Leo's hand moved automatically, adjusting variables in his mind. He couldn't spend divine energy, but he could calculate. Lower your grip by 6 inches, he instructed. And you, push from the side, not the back. The torque distribution is all wrong. The men hesitated, but the cart groaned ominously. They followed his instructions. As they repositioned themselves, Leo completed his sketch, a simple counterweight system using rocks from the roadside. Here, he said, showing the diagram. Tie these to the front axle. It'll stabilize the load during gravity fluctuations. With skeptical glances, the men implemented his design. When the next gravity shift came, a sudden increase that should have crushed the cart, it held steady. The counterweights absorbed the force, distributing it evenly. The first man stared at Leo, then at the stable cart. How? Physics, Leo said simply. Not magic. Elara watched the exchange with an unreadable expression. When they moved on, she said quietly, you adapt quickly. Most mages would have tried to reinforce the cart with spells that might fail at any moment. Spells depend on consistent physical laws, Leo replied. When those laws are being rewritten. He trailed off, thinking of his own edits. The rain in Oakhaven. The orbital adjustments. Each change had seemed minor at the time, but together they were unraveling reality itself. Inside Iron Vein, the signs of disruption were everywhere. A blacksmith's forge flickered erratically as thermal convection patterns shifted. A water wheel turned in fits and starts as fluid dynamics became unpredictable. Townspeople moved with nervous haste, their eyes darting to the sky as if expecting it to tear open at any moment. They found the town elder in a stone building that served as both meeting hall and records office. Her name was Marin, a woman with iron-gray hair and hands calloused from decades of mining work. She listened to Elara's explanation with growing skepticism. More mages, she said flatly when Elara finished. Forgive my bluntness, Archmage, but your kind hasn't done us any favors lately. Every spell fails. Every enchantment unravels. We've lost 3 miners to cave-ins when reinforcement spells collapsed. We're not inclined to trust magical solutions. This isn't magic, Leo interjected. He laid his invention sketchpad on the table, opening it to the designs he'd been developing since Silver Reach. These are physical devices. They use magnetite to create stable magnetic fields that reinforce dimensional boundaries. Copper coils to channel electromagnetic energy. No spells. No incantations. Just engineering. Marin studied the diagrams. Her eyes, sharp with intelligence, traced the lines and notations. You're the one they're hunting, she said after a long moment. The physics blasphemer. Leo met her gaze. I'm trying to fix what I broke. For a tense minute, no one spoke. Then Marin sighed. We have the materials. The North Mine produces magnetite so pure it sings when you strike it. Our copper is the best in the region. But I won't risk my people on untested devices. Then let me test one, Leo said. A small prototype. If it works, you provide the materials for larger versions. Marin considered, then nodded. There's a fracture in the old smelting yard. Small, but growing. Deal with it, and we'll talk. The old smelting yard lay at the town's edge, where abandoned furnaces stood like silent sentinels. In the center of the yard, reality had torn. The fracture wasn't large, perhaps 3 feet across, but it pulsed with wrongness. The air around it shimmered like heat haze, and colors bled at its edges, blues becoming purples becoming colors that had no name. Through the tear, Leo glimpsed shifting geometries that hurt to look at, angles that shouldn't exist, shapes that folded in on themselves. Reality integrity here is at 48%, Elara said, her voice tight. She held a detection crystal that glowed with ominous crimson light. If this grows much larger. Leo didn't need her to finish. He'd seen what happened when fractures reached critical mass. The Void Weavers would come through, unraveling everything they touched. Working quickly, he gathered materials from the yard's debris, scraps of copper piping, discarded magnetite chunks, even bits of iron slag that could be repurposed. His invention sketchpad lay open on a flat stone, the pages flipping as he referenced different designs. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, born of countless hours in university labs. First, he shaped the magnetite into a ring, using a hammer and chisel borrowed from Marin. The stone did indeed sing when struck, a clear, pure tone that resonated in the bones. He wound copper wire around it in precise spirals, calculating the optimal number of turns to maximize electromagnetic induction. You work like an artificer, Corin observed, watching from a respectful distance. But without the magical infusions. The principles are the same, Leo said without looking up. Energy transfer. Field stabilization. Just, different sources. As he worked, he explained each step to Marin and the gathering townspeople. How the magnetite's natural magnetic field would anchor the device in local spacetime. How the copper coils would capture ambient electromagnetic energy from the reality fractures themselves, turning the tier's own power against it. How the iron slag, when properly arranged, would create a Faraday cage effect, containing the stabilization field. When the device was complete, it looked deceptively simple, a ring of singing stone wrapped in copper, with iron fragments arranged in a precise geometric pattern around its base. But Leo could feel the potential in it. The way the materials resonated together, creating harmonics that vibrated at the frequency of stable reality. Now for the test, he said. He approached the fracture. Up close, the wrongness was overwhelming. His stomach churned as his senses tried to process impossible sensory input. The air smelled of ozone and something else, something cold and empty, like the void between stars. Sounds came distorted, stretched thin or compressed to bursts of noise. Carefully, he placed the device at the fracture's edge. The moment it made contact, the copper coils began to glow with soft blue light. The magnetite ring hummed, its song rising in pitch. The iron fragments aligned themselves, drawn into position by magnetic forces. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the fracture began to change. The shimmering air stilled. The bleeding colors snapped back to their proper hues. The tier's edges, which had been slowly widening, stopped their advance. Then, impossibly, they began to contract. Inch by inch, the fracture healed itself, reality knitting back together as the device channeled stabilizing energy into the wound. When it was done, only a faint scar remained, a hairline crack in the air that slowly faded to nothing. The yard fell silent. Then Marin stepped forward, her eyes wide. It worked. She turned to Leo. You'll have your materials. Whatever you need. For the next several hours, Iron Vein transformed into a workshop. Miners brought carts of pure magnetite. Smelters produced copper ingots and wire. Leo worked with teams of townspeople, teaching them how to assemble the devices. He showed them how to calibrate the magnetic fields, how to tune the copper coils, how to arrange the iron components for maximum effect. Ilara watched it all with growing respect. You're not just building devices, she said during a break. You're teaching them to defend themselves. Even if you're gone. They shouldn't need me, Leo said, wiping sweat from his brow. They should have tools that work regardless of who's using them. As evening approached, they had assembled 6 full-sized rift-sealing devices and components for a dozen more. The townspeople moved with new confidence, their fear replaced by purposeful activity. Leo allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, the first real hope he'd felt since Oakhaven. Then the shouting started. From the town gate came the sound of approaching horses and raised voices. Leo recognized one of them, Alden, the blacksmith from Oakhaven. He rode at the head of a small group, his face grim beneath his travel-stained cloak. With him came Marta, looking older and wearier than Leo remembered, and several other Oakhaven villagers armed with makeshift weapons. Leo! Alden called, dismounting hurriedly. We came as soon as we heard. He never finished the sentence. From the cliffs above Iron Vein, shadows detached themselves from the rock. They flowed downward like liquid darkness, moving with impossible speed. Void weavers, not just 1 or 2, but a dozen of them. Their forms shifted and blurred, sometimes humanoid, sometimes something else entirely. Where they passed, light died. Torches guttered out. Lanterns dimmed to feeble glows. The lead weaver stopped at the town's edge, its form resolving into something vaguely man-shaped but wrong, limbs too long, joints bending in unnatural directions. It turned its featureless face toward Leo, and he felt its attention like a physical weight. Recognition. Hunger. Then it spoke, its voice the sound of tearing fabric and shattering glass. The editor of laws. The unraveler of reality. We have come for the feast. All around the town, more fractures began to open. Reality integrity plummeted. And the Void Weavers advanced. The Void Weavers descended upon Iron Vein like a tide of living shadow, their forms shifting and dissolving at the edges where they drank the light from the air. Leo felt the cold before he saw them, a sudden drop in temperature that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. His prototype rift-sealing device hummed in his hands, its copper coils glowing faintly with residual ley line energy from the earlier test. They're coming from the cliffs. Alden shouted, his blacksmith's hammer already raised. The man had arrived with Marta and a dozen Oakhaven villagers only moments before, their faces now etched with terror as the shadows coalesced into humanoid shapes. 12 of them, maybe more, Leo's mind raced, counting the fractures that bloomed around the town like dark flowers. Reality integrity warnings flashed across his Deus Ex Machina interface, the numbers plummeting, 48%, 47%, 46%. Ilara's staff flared with arcane light. Form a perimeter. Corin, shield the townspeople. The young mage began weaving protective barriers, but Leo saw the magic flicker, another spell failure as physics overwrote the mystical laws. The Void Weavers seemed to sense it too, they moved faster, their forms elongating toward the weakest points in reality. Leo activated his device. The electromagnetic field it generated pulsed outward, a visible ripple in the air that made the nearest weaver shudder. For a moment, the entity's form stabilized, becoming solid enough for Alden to strike. The blacksmith's hammer connected with a sound like shattering glass, and the weaver dissolved into wisps of shadow. But two more took its place, emerging from a fresh fracture that split the ground near the old smelting yard. They're targeting the town's foundations. Marta cried, helping Marin shepherd the Iron Vein townspeople toward the central square. The elder woman's earlier distrust had vanished, replaced by grim determination as she directed her people to safety. Leo checked his divine energy, 1/100, but the interference was worse now. The number flickered between 0 and 1, unstable as the fractures multiplied. He needed to buy time. With a thought, he accessed the Deus Ex Machina app, his fingers moving through the interface only he could see. Gravity variable, local adjustment. He selected the area around the advancing weavers, reducing gravitational pull by 30%. The effect was immediate. The ground beneath the entities softened, their shadowy forms sinking slightly as if walking through mud. One weaver stumbled, its limbs moving with unnatural slowness. But the energy cost was devastating, Leo's remaining divine energy dropped to 0. The app flashed a warning, critical level. Interference at 89%. He felt a wave of dizziness, the world tilting as his connection to physics wavered. Leo. Ilara's voice cut through the haze. She was beside him now, her staff creating a dome of magical energy that held back 3 weavers. Your device, can it be amplified? With more copper, stronger magnets. Leo gasped, his vision swimming. Alden, the materials from the smithy. The blacksmith was already moving, his massive frame barreling through the chaos toward the town's workshop. Marta followed, her elder's robes billowing as she gathered townspeople to form a human chain, passing tools and materials hand over hand. Leo watched, his mind clinging to the physics even as his body threatened to fail. The weavers were learning, they avoided the areas where his gravity edit persisted, instead clustering around the edges where reality was thinnest. A new fracture opened directly beneath the town well. Water erupted upward, then froze in mid-air as the weaver there consumed the thermal energy. Ice crystals hung suspended, glittering in the dying light. Brother Kalen would have called it a miracle, Leo saw only violated physics. Alden returned with an armload of copper piping and magnetite ore. Will this do? Leo nodded, his hands trembling as he took the invention sketchpad from his belt. He didn't have the energy for complex designs, just simple modifications. He sketched rapidly, larger coils, layered magnetic fields, a focusing array to channel what little ley line energy still flowed through Iron Vein's bedrock. The sketchpad glowed, and the components began rearranging themselves, the copper twisting into new shapes guided by his design. It needs power, Leo said, his voice thin. More than I can give. Ilara understood. She placed her staff against the device, and Leo saw the strain on her face as she forced magic to cooperate with physics. The staff's glow intensified, feeding energy into the copper coils. The device hummed louder, the sound building to a resonant frequency that made the air vibrate. Now! Ilara shouted. Leo activated the enhanced device. A wave of electromagnetic force erupted, not just a ripple but a wall of energy that swept across the town square. The Void Weavers shrieked, a sound like tearing fabric and breaking glass mixed together. Their forms destabilized completely, shadows unraveling into nothingness. The fractures around them began to close, reality stitching itself back together with visible seams of golden light. But the main rift, the one by the cliffs where the weavers had first emerged, remained. It pulsed like a wound, edges fraying as it tried to expand. Leo stumbled toward it, the device growing hot in his hands. The copper coils were melting, the magnetite losing its polarity. They had one chance. Focus it. Alden bellowed, his hammer striking the ground to create a conductive path. Channel it through the earth. Leo dropped to his knees, plunging the device's base into the soil. Elara joined him, her staff driving into the ground beside it. Magic and physics merged in that moment, not harmoniously, but with violent necessity. The device exploded in a flash of light and heat. When the glare faded, the rift was gone. Only a scar remained on the cliff face, stone fused into glassy smoothness where reality had healed. The remaining weavers had vanished, retreating through whatever dimensions they called home. Silence fell over Iron Vein, broken only by the crackle of cooling metal and the ragged breathing of exhausted defenders. Leo lay on his back, staring at the darkening sky. His divine energy read 0 out of 100, the interface flickering weakly. He was empty, drained not just of power but of the certainty that had carried him this far. Marta helped him sit up. "You saved the town," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For now," Leo whispered. The device was destroyed. Elara's staff had cracked, its magic spent. Alden's hammer lay broken where he'd driven it into the earth. They had exhausted every resource. It was then that the new arrival appeared at the town's edge. Brother Kalen walked slowly through the settling dust, his priestly robes pristine amidst the destruction. He carried no weapons, only a scroll case sealed with Aquarius symbol, a wave encircling a droplet. "Leo," Kalen said, his voice carrying across the quiet square. "The Lady of Waters has watched your struggles. She offers aid." The priest's eyes were serious, lacking the panic Leo remembered from Oakhaven. This was a different man, or perhaps the same man facing a different world. "What kind of aid?" Elara asked, her tone wary as she moved to stand beside Leo. Kalen unsealed the scroll case. Inside was not parchment, but a vial of glowing blue liquid that seemed to contain its own light. "A fragment of divine essence," he said. "Enough to restore some of your power. Aquaria's pantheon has resources that could help seal the remaining fractures." He paused, his gaze locking with Leo's. "But there is a condition. You must restrain your edits to water. No more changes to rainfall, currents, or hydrological cycles. The lady's domain has suffered enough disruption." Leo looked at the vial, then at the exhausted faces around him, Marta, Alden, Marin, Elara, Corin, the townspeople of Iron Vein who had trusted him with their home. His divine energy read 0. The star gods were coming. The void weavers would return. He reached for the vial, his hand trembling not from weakness now, but from the weight of what he was accepting. The glass was cool against his skin, the light within pulsing like a heartbeat. "How much restraint?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Complete," Kalen said. "You become the god of physics, but water remains hers. Do we have an accord?" The vial glowed brighter, awaiting his decision. Around them, night fell on a town saved but still fragile, on alliances forged in desperation, on a power that came with chains. The air in Ironvein's town hall was thick with the scent of damp stone and burnt herbs, a remnant of the recent Void Weaver attack. Leo stood at the center of the room, his back to a rough-hewn wooden table scattered with sketches and half-assembled devices. Brother Kalen, clad in the blue robes of Aquaria's priesthood, held a small crystal vial that glowed with a soft, aqueous light. Archmage Elara, her expression a mask of wary skepticism, stood opposite him, fingers tracing the edge of her staff. Outside, the town was a hive of activity, villagers repairing damaged structures, Alden hammering at makeshift barricades, and Marta directing supplies with a weary but determined air. Leo's mind churned with calculations. His divine energy, displayed on the Deus Ex Machina app, flickered at 0 out of 100, the interference from the reality fractures making it a ghostly, unreliable readout. He could feel the emptiness like a hollow ache in his chest, a reminder of the gravity edit that had saved the town but left him powerless. Kalen's offer hung between them, a tangible promise and a heavy chain. "Aquaria's essence can restore a portion of your power," Kalen said, his voice calm but edged with authority. He placed the vial on the table. It emitted a faint hum that vibrated through the wood. "But the condition is absolute. You must swear to refrain from any physics edits affecting water, rain, rivers, tides, all of it. The Pantheon cannot tolerate further disruptions to our hydrological domains." Leo's eyes narrowed. He glanced at the app, its interface showing the map of reality fractures they had studied earlier. The convergence point, a nexus of ley lines where the fractures were most concentrated, pulsed with a malevolent energy. Without his abilities, sealing it would be impossible, but accepting the vial meant surrendering a tool he might need later. He thought of the Void Weavers, their shadowy forms unraveling reality, and the star god's celestial chariots drawing nearer. Every decision felt like balancing on a knife's edge. Elara stepped forward, her staff tapping lightly on the stone floor. Your physics edits have already caused enough chaos, Leo. But the Void Weavers are a threat to all of us, magic and science alike. If we are to assault the main Nexus, we need a coalition. My mages can provide magical amplification and shielding, but your technology is key to sealing the rifts. She gestured to the invention sketchpad on the table, its pages filled with diagrams of rift-sealing devices. Integrate our systems. Combine your machines with our enchantments. It's the only way to stand a chance. Leo picked up the sketchpad, his fingers tracing the lines of a prototype convergence engine he had designed with Gareth in Silver Reach. The device used principles of harmonic resonance to stabilize fractures, but it had failed under the strain of the last attack. He needed something more robust, something that could channel both physics and magic without tearing itself apart. His thoughts raced, variables of pressure, frequency, energy transfer. He could almost feel the equations forming in his mind, a desperate puzzle with lives at stake. I'll take the essence, Leo said finally, his voice low but firm. He reached for the vial, its cool surface tingling against his skin. But I won't make an oath that could doom us all. If water edits are necessary to stop the Weavers, I'll use them. Aquaria will have to trust that my priority is saving this world, not destroying it. Kalen's face tightened, a flicker of anger in his eyes. That is not the agreement. The Pantheon demands certainty. Certainty is a luxury we don't have, Leo countered, uncorking the vial. A shimmering liquid, like condensed moonlight, flowed into his palm. He activated the Deus Ex Machina app, and a prompt appeared, divine essence detected. Absorb to restore energy. He selected yes, and a surge of warmth spread through him, the app's display stabilizing at 25 out of 100. The interference lessened, but a faint static remained, a reminder of the fracture's lingering effects. He felt a sliver of power return, enough to make minor edits, but far from his full strength. Elara watched, her skepticism giving way to a grudging respect. Then we proceed. I'll have Corrin and the mages prepare enchantments for your devices. We leave for the Nexus at dawn. But we must move quickly, the star gods are not patient. Over the next hours, Leo worked feverishly. He spread the sketchpad across the table, sketching improved versions of the rift-sealing devices. Alden brought in materials, scraps of metal, ley-line crystals from Ironveins mines, and enchanted components provided by Elara's team. Leo explained the integration process to a small group, Marta, who listened with a village elder's practicality, Alden, his hands calloused from forging, and Finn, Gareth's apprentice from Silver Reach, who had arrived with reinforcements. The device needs to resonate at the frequency of the fractures, Leo said, pointing to a diagram. Magic can amplify that resonance, but it must be precisely tuned. Too much, and it overloads, too little, and the rift remains open. He demonstrated with a small prototype, adjusting variables on the app, a slight tweak to atmospheric pressure to stabilize the crystal matrix. The device hummed to life, its light blending blue physics energy with golden magical threads. A test on a minor fracture in the corner of the room sealed it with a soft pop, leaving only a faint scar in the air. Marin, the town elder, entered with a tray of food, her initial distrust softened by the earlier success. The people are scared, but they'll support you. Just don't let those shadow things back in. She placed the tray down and left, her footsteps echoing in the hall. As evening deepened, the coalition took shape. Elara assigned mages to pair with Leo's devices, their spells weaving into the mechanical frameworks. Brother Kalen, though still uneasy, agreed to contribute Aquaria's blessings for protection, a compromise that left the vial's conditions unresolved but allowed cooperation. Leo felt the weight of their expectations, the villagers' hope, the mages' curiosity, the gods' wrath. He checked the app again, reality integrity at the Nexus had dropped to 48%, a dangerous threshold. The Void Weavers were growing stronger, their intelligence evident in the way the fractures now spiraled toward the ley lines. Just as they finalized plans, a sudden chill swept through the hall. The torches flickered, their flames dimming to a ghostly blue. A figure materialized in the doorway, tall, clad in armor that seemed woven from starlight, with eyes that held the cold vastness of space. It was an emissary of the star gods, its presence casting long shadows that danced with constellations. Leo, the editor of laws, the emissary spoke, its voice a resonant echo that vibrated through the stones. The celestial pantheon has watched your disruptions. You are a blasphemer against the natural order. Surrender yourself to our judgment, or we will intervene with force beyond your comprehension. The Nexus will be purged, and your physics edits erased from existence. The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was almost palpable. Leo met the emissary's gaze, his hand tightening around the sketchpad. The coalition held its breath, caught between the threat of the Void Weavers and the wrath of the stars. The town hall of Iron Vein fell silent as the star god emissary materialized. Light coalesced into a humanoid form that seemed woven from starlight itself, a figure of shifting constellations and cosmic dust, standing taller than any mortal in the room. Its presence carried the weight of celestial mechanics, a subtle gravitational pull that made the lantern flames gutter and the air grow thin. Leo felt his skin prickle, the divine energy within him, now restored to 25 units, stirring in recognition of another power that operated on cosmic scales. Archmage Alara stepped forward, her staff glowing with defensive wards. "You come unannounced to a gathering of allies," she said, her voice steady despite the tension coiling through the room. "State your purpose, emissary." Brother Kalen stood beside her, his aquamarine robes seeming dull compared to the emissary's radiance. Marta and Alden remained near the hall's entrance, their hands resting on weapons. Marin, the Iron Vein elder, watched from beside a table strewn with blueprints and rift-sealing device components, her expression guarded. The townspeople who had gathered for the planning meeting now pressed against the walls, their whispers dying as the celestial being spoke. "I am Lyra, voice of the star gods," the emissary said, its voice resonating with harmonics that seemed to vibrate through stone and bone alike. "We have observed your disruptions, Leo, editor of physical laws. Your orbital adjustments have destabilized astrological magic across 3 constellations. Now you gather mortals and minor deities to confront the Void Weavers, ancient foes who predate even our pantheon." Leo's mind raced. The app's interface flickered at the edge of his perception, showing the divine energy counter steady at 25 out of 100, but with interference patterns dancing around the number. He remembered the orbital edits he'd made weeks ago, minor adjustments to planetary positions to test the app's capabilities. At the time, they'd seemed harmless experiments in celestial mechanics. Now he understood why the star gods were angry. "The Void Weavers feed on reality fractures," Lyra continued, starlight swirling around its form like a miniature galaxy. "They are not mere monsters to be sealed away with devices. They are entropy given form, drawn to the weaknesses you create when you overwrite natural laws. Every rift you close with your physics toys opens 3 more elsewhere in the cosmic fabric." Alara's knuckles whitened around her staff. "We have contained their attacks here in Iron Vein. Our combined approach is temporary," Lyra interrupted, the stars in its form flaring brighter. "The Weavers remember the editor. They sense his signature in every fracture. You are not containing a threat, you are baiting it toward greater concentrations of magical energy. The ley line nexus you plan to defend will draw them like moths to flame." Leo stepped forward, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. The invention sketchpad rested in his satchel, along with the depleted vial from Aquaria. He needed to think, to find a way through this confrontation without triggering another divine war. The app simulation function glowed in his mind's eye, a tool he'd rarely used, designed to model physics edits before committing divine energy. "What do the star gods want?" Leo asked, keeping his voice level. "If you believe my approach is flawed, offer an alternative. The Weavers attacked this town. They're consuming reality itself. We can't wait for perfect solutions while people die." Lyra's starlight form shifted, constellations rearranging themselves. "We want you to cease all physics edits immediately. Surrender your device to our custody. The fractures will heal naturally over centuries, and the Weavers will return to dormancy." A murmur swept through the hall. Marta's hand went to her sword hilt. Alden shook his head slowly, his blacksmith's muscles tense. Brother Kalen looked troubled, his loyalty to Aquaria warring with the practical need to address the immediate threat. "Centuries." Marin spoke from her place by the table, her voice rough with the accent of the mining town. "My people can't wait centuries. The gravity fluctuations alone have collapsed 2 mine shafts this week. Children are getting sick from reality unraveling at the edges of town. You speak of cosmic balance while our world falls apart." Lyra turned its attention to the elder, starlight dimming slightly. "Mortals always prioritize the immediate over the eternal. But your suffering will be nothing compared to what comes if the Weavers consume a ley line nexus. The resulting cascade failure could unravel magic across this entire region." Leo felt the pressure building, the need to act against the looming threat, the divine demands for restraint, the mortal lives hanging in the balance. He reached into his satchel and withdrew the invention sketchpad. The leather-bound device felt warm in his hands, the pages filled with diagrams of rift sealing devices, gravity stabilizers, and the convergence engine design he'd created with Gareth. "Let me show you something," Leo said, opening the sketchpad to a blank page. He focused his mind, calling up the app simulation function. Divine energy trickled from his reserve, a single unit, leaving him at 24 out of 100. The cost was minimal for a simulation, but he felt the drain nonetheless. Golden light spilled from the sketchpad, projecting a three-dimensional model into the air above the table. It showed the region's topography, the mountains around Iron Vein, the ley lines glowing with magical energy, the convergence point where multiple lines intersected deep in the wilderness. Red markers indicated known Void Weaver fractures, while blue ones showed the proposed placement of rift sealing devices. "This is our plan," Leo explained, using a finger to manipulate the simulation. The model responded, showing the devices activating in sequence, creating an overlapping field of stabilized physics. "We don't just seal individual fractures. We create a harmonic resonance that reinforces reality itself at the nexus point. The weavers can't consume what's being actively strengthened." He zoomed in on one of the devices, showing its internal components. Each unit combines magical amplification crystals with physics-based stabilizers. Ilara's mages provide the magical component. My designs handle the physical reinforcement. Working together, we can create something neither side could achieve alone. Lyra watched, starlight flickering as it analyzed the simulation. "Your model assumes the weavers will attack predictably. They do not. They adapt, learn, evolve. Your previous device in Iron Vein worked once. The next time, they will have countermeasures. Then we adapt faster," Leo said, his voice gaining conviction. "Look at the data from the Iron Vein attack." He manipulated the simulation again, calling up recordings from the battle, the way the combined physics magic attack had repelled the weavers, the resonance patterns that had sealed the main rift. "The weavers recognized me as the editor of laws. They're drawn to my signature. That means we can use me as bait, draw them into a prepared position at the nexus where our devices will be strongest." Ilara's eyes narrowed. "You propose using yourself as a tactical asset? That's the only way to guarantee they come to where we're strongest," Leo finished. "The star gods are right about one thing, the weavers are drawn to me. So let's use that. Set the trap with the best tools we have." Brother Kalen stepped forward, his priestly robes rustling. "Aquaria's essence flows within you now. If you fall to the weavers, that power could be consumed, twisted. The risk is too great." "The risk of doing nothing is greater," Leo countered. He turned back to Lyra. "Give us one chance. Observe our assault on the Nexus. If we fail, if the weavers break through, then do what you must. But if we succeed, you'll have proof that cooperation between physics and magic can solve problems neither can handle alone." The emissary's starlight form pulsed, constellations swirling in complex patterns. The air grew colder, and Leo could see his breath fogging. The simulation continued to play above the table, showing the planned deployment in meticulous detail, the positioning of each device, the timing of activations, the predicted resonance patterns. "Your plan has elegance," Lyra admitted after a long silence. "The integration of magical and physical principles is novel. The star gods have always viewed them as separate domains, celestial mechanics versus astrological magic. You treat them as aspects of a unified reality." "Because they are," Leo said softly. "Magic follows rules too. They're just rules I don't fully understand yet. But every spell I've seen disrupted by my edits, every failed reinforcement, every unstable portal, follows patterns. Cause and effect. The weavers break those patterns. They unravel causality itself. My devices don't fight magic with physics. They use physics to reinforce the underlying structure that makes magic possible." Lyra's form brightened, then dimmed to a softer glow. "Very well. We will observe. One assault on the Nexus, as you have planned. But know this, Leo, if you fail, if the weavers consume even a fraction of the ley line energy, the consequences will be immediate. The star gods will intervene directly, and our methods will not be as surgical as your devices." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Celestial intervention would mean orbital adjustments on a massive scale, perhaps even stellar realignments that could devastate the region regardless of the weaver threat. Understood, Leo said, meeting the emissary's gaze. We leave at dawn. The devices are nearly complete. Alden's blacksmiths have been working through the night, and Ilara's mages have prepared the amplification crystals. As he spoke, a tremor passed through the hall. Not an earthquake, but something subtler, a vibration in the air itself, a wrongness that made the lantern flames burn green for a moment before returning to normal. Everyone felt it. The townspeople murmured in fear, and Marin's hand went to the amulet at her throat. Lyra's starlight form rippled. They sense your planning. The weavers are stirring. My warning stands, observe, but do not interfere unless absolutely necessary. The star gods will be watching. With those final words, the emissary dissolved into motes of light that drifted upward through the ceiling, leaving behind the scent of ozone and cold space. The simulation from Leo's sketchpad flickered and vanished, the spent divine energy leaving him at 23 out of 100. He closed the device, his hands trembling slightly from the confrontation. Ilara approached him, her expression grim. You've bought us time, but at what cost? If we fail. We won't, Leo said, though he felt the weight of the promise. He looked around the hall, at Alden checking weapon edges, at Marta speaking quietly with Iron Vein guards, at Brother Kalen praying to Aquaria for guidance, at Marin organizing townspeople to finish the devices. We have to make this work. For all of them. Outside, the night grew darker than it should have been. Stars winked out one by one, not from clouds, but from something drinking the light itself. Distant howls echoed from the mountains, not wolves, but the sound of reality tearing at the seams. The Void Weavers were gathering, drawn to the planning, to the concentration of intention, to the editor who dared challenge them. Leo packed his sketchpad, his mind already running through the simulations again, looking for weaknesses in the plan, for points where the Weavers might break through. The coalition had its chance. One assault. One opportunity to prove that creation could withstand entropy. And as the darkness deepened outside, he knew the Weavers would make sure the price of failure was more terrible than any of them could imagine. The morning air in Iron Vein tasted of ozone and burnt metal, a lingering scent from the previous day's reality tremors. Leo stood at the edge of the town's makeshift camp, his fingers tracing the smooth surface of the vial containing Aquaria's divine essence. 23 points of energy remained in his app, a meager reserve that felt like a handful of sand against the desert ahead. Around him, the coalition assembled with the grim efficiency of soldiers preparing for a siege. Archmage Ilara moved among her mages, her silver robes whispering against the cobblestones as she checked their arcane preparations. Her team of 7, including Corrin, who nervously adjusted his focus crystal, carried enchanted staves that glowed with containment spells. Brother Kalen stood apart with 3 priests of Aquaria, their blue vestments marked with water sigils that shimmered in the pale dawn light. They chanted low prayers, calling upon their goddess's protection while casting wary glances at Leo. Marin, the Iron Vein elder, approached with a cart pulled by 2 sturdy mules. Supplies for 3 days, she said, her voice gruff but not unkind. Food, water, bandages. And these. She gestured to a crate containing 6 of the improved rift sealing devices, cylindrical brass contraptions with crystal cores that Leo had designed using his invention sketchpad. Each integrated physics principles with magical amplification, their surfaces etched with both mathematical equations and arcane runes. Thank you, Leo said, his mind already calculating weight distribution and travel time. He opened his app, the familiar interface glowing in his vision. The divine energy counter read 23/100 in stark white numerals. Below it, the physics variables he could manipulate, gravity, atmospheric pressure, thermal conductivity, appeared as sliders, each requiring energy expenditure to adjust. He resisted the urge to test them, conserving every precious point. Ilara joined him, her sharp eyes assessing the devices. The ley line Nexus lies 15 miles northeast, through the shattered peaks, she said, unrolling a parchment map. Our scouts report reality fractures have warped the terrain. Gravity wells, temporal distortions, pockets where magic fails entirely. Leo studied the map. The path wound through mountain passes marked with crimson X's where Void Weaver activity had been detected. We'll need to move carefully, he said. My device can detect fractures within a 100-yard radius, but it requires constant monitoring. My mages will maintain magical shields, Ilara replied. But if your physics overrides disrupt our spells. They won't, Leo assured her, though he wasn't certain. The uneasy truce between science and magic felt like balancing on a knife's edge. Brother Kalen approached, his expression solemn. Aquaria's blessing upon this endeavor, he said, placing a hand on Leo's shoulder. The touch carried a faint chill, like river water. "Remember our agreement. No water edits without consultation." "I remember," Leo said, though the restriction chafed. Water manipulation could have cleared paths or created barriers, but the vial's energy restoration had come with chains. They set out as the sun crested the mountains, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Leo walked at the head of the column with Alara and Kalen, the rift-sealing device in his hands humming softly. It was a modified version of his earlier design, a brass disc with a central crystal that pulsed with blue light when near reality fractures. He'd used his sketchpad to incorporate magnetic field sensors and harmonic resonance detectors, creating a tool that could map instability in real time. For the first hour, the march proceeded without incident. The path wound through pine forests where birdsong echoed strangely, notes stretching and compressing as if time itself were uneven. Leo watched his device's readings, noting minor fluctuations in local gravity, 0.98 g here, 1.02 g there, but nothing severe enough to warrant intervention. Then they reached the first fracture. It appeared as a shimmer in the air ahead, like heat haze on a summer road, but cold emanated from it in waves. The forest around the distortion was wrong, trees grew at impossible angles, their branches twisting in geometric patterns that hurt to look at. One pine had its trunk spiraled like a corkscrew, its needles glowing with faint bioluminescence. "Stop," Leo said, raising a hand. The coalition halted behind him, weapons and staves at the ready. He studied the device's readings. The crystal pulsed rapidly, casting frantic blue patterns across its surface. "Gravity variance of 30%, he murmured. "Atmospheric pressure dropping to half normal. And, temporal dilation. Time's moving slower inside that zone. Can you seal it?" Alara asked, her mages already forming a defensive perimeter. Leo nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. He activated the device, adjusting its settings to match the fracture's signature. The brass components whirred as crystals aligned, emitting a low hum that vibrated in his teeth. He'd designed it to emit counter-frequency waves, sound vibrations tuned to reality's baseline state, reinforced with magical amplification from Alara's runes. 3 points of energy, he whispered, accessing his app. He selected the gravity variable, tweaking it from 1.3 g back to 1.0 g in the affected area. The app's counter dropped from 23 to 20. A wave of fatigue washed over him, brief but sharp, like missing a step in the dark. The device flared with light. Blue beams lanced into the distortion, weaving through the warped space like threads through fabric. The spiraled tree groaned, its trunk untwisting with a sound of splintering wood. The cold haze dissipated, leaving normal forest behind, though the corrected pine now stood with fresh cracks in its bark, evidence of the violence of the adjustment. "Path cleared," Leo announced, his voice steadier than he felt. Alara's mages lowered their staves, but their tension remained. Corrin approached the formerly distorted area, his focus crystal glowing as he scanned for residual magic. "Clean seal," he reported. "No Weaver signatures." They pressed onward, encountering 3 more minor fractures in the next 2 miles. Each required Leo's intervention, a gravity adjustment here, atmospheric pressure normalization there, draining his energy to 17 out of 100. The device's crystal began to show hairline cracks from the strain. At midday, they reached the base of the shattered peaks proper. The mountains lived up to their name, jagged spires of black stone rose like broken teeth against the sky, many floating in midair where gravity had failed entirely. Chunks of mountain the size of houses hovered in silent defiance, casting shifting shadows across the pass below. "This is their work," Brother Kalen said, gazing upward. "The Void Weavers consume reality's structure. What remains, drifts." Leo's device screamed to life, its crystal flashing crimson. "Major fracture ahead," he said. "Multiple signatures. And, movement." They rounded a bend in the path and found the way blocked by a canyon that shouldn't have existed, a 100-foot chasm torn through solid rock, its edges glowing with sickly purple light. Across the gap, 3 floating islands of terrain drifted slowly, their surfaces covered in normal grass and trees as if scooped from some distant meadow. Between them, the air shimmered with dozens of minor gravity wells. And on the nearest island, shadows moved. Void Weavers. 4 of them, their forms shifting between substance and smoke. They stood taller than humans, limbs elongated and jointed wrong, faces featureless except for glowing white eyes that drank the light around them. Where they walked, grass withered to gray ash. "Scouts," Alara hissed. "They've detected our approach." The weavers turned as one, those blank eyes fixing on the coalition. One raised a hand, and the air between them rippled. A gravity well formed, a sphere of distorted space that began pulling rocks, debris, and even light toward it. Shields! Elara commanded. Her mages slammed their staves into the ground, creating a shimmering barrier of arcane energy. The gravity well hit the shield, and the magic crackled under the strain, ribbons of light peeling away like torn fabric. Leo acted without thinking. He adjusted local gravity around the Weaver's Island, increasing it to 2.5 g. The app counter dropped from 17 to 15. The Weavers staggered, their forms compressing under the sudden weight. One collapsed to its knees, the substance of its body flowing like tar. But they adapted. The lead Weaver made a tearing motion with its hands, and the gravity edit unraveled. Leo felt it like a snapped cord, his control over the variable slipping away. The energy wasn't refunded, it was consumed, the fracture eating the adjustment. They can counter physics edits, Leo realized aloud, cold dread pooling in his stomach. Then we do this the old way, Elara said. She gestured, and her mages unleashed volleys of arcane bolts, streaks of silver energy that shot across the chasm. The weavers raised hands, and the bolts slowed, then dissipated, their magic unraveling into harmless light. Brother Kalen's priests began chanting, calling water from the air. Condensation formed, then ice shards that flew toward the weavers. The entities didn't bother countering, the ice passed through them as if through smoke, leaving no mark. They're immune to direct magic, Corin shouted, panic edging his voice. Leo studied his device. The crystal showed the fracture's patterns, interwoven strands of distorted physics. He couldn't edit the weavers directly, but he could edit their environment. The islands, he called. They're anchored by minor fractures. Break the anchors. He focused on the nearest floating island, targeting the gravity well beneath it. With 5 points of energy, he normalized the variable. The counter dropped to 10 out of 100. The island shuddered, then began to fall. The weavers scattered, leaping to adjacent islands as their platform dropped into the chasm. Stone and soil tumbled into the purple-lit depths, vanishing into the fracture below. Again. Elara commanded, her mages now targeting the remaining island's anchors with disintegration spells. Magic couldn't hurt the weavers, but it could erode the fractured reality that supported them. Leo worked in tandem, spending precious energy points, 9, then 8, then 7, as he normalized gravity wells. Each adjustment felt like lifting stones with his mind, the fatigue building behind his eyes. The device in his hands grew hot, its crystal now webbed with cracks. 2 more islands fell. The weavers retreated to the final platform, but as the coalition focused their efforts, the entities did something unexpected, they stepped off the edge into empty air, and didn't fall. They walked across the chasm on an invisible bridge of solidified nothingness, their forms blurring as they crossed the fractured space. They're coming across. Brother Kalen warned. Leo saw the pattern too late. The weavers weren't fleeing, they were using the coalition's attacks as cover, the falling islands creating chaos that masked their approach. Now they emerged from the distortion of tumbling earth, materializing on the coalition's side of the chasm. Close enough to touch. The lead weaver reached for Leo. Its hand passed through the air, and Leo felt reality unravel around him, the solidity of the ground beneath his feet softened, the color drained from the world, sound muted to a dull roar. He stumbled back, his device flashing warning signals. Elara's mages reacted instantly. They didn't attack the weavers directly, instead, they cast area denial spells, walls of force that pushed against the unraveling effect, containing the reality distortion. The weavers pressed against the barriers, their forms smearing against the magic like ink on glass. We can't hold them. Corin screamed, his focus crystal cracking under the strain. Leo made a decision. He couldn't edit the weavers, but he could edit everything else. He accessed his app, selecting atmospheric pressure. With 6 of his remaining 7 energy points, he created a pressure differential, a wall of compressed air between the coalition and the weavers. The counter dropped to 1 out of 100. The effect was immediate and violent. Air rushed in with the force of a hurricane, slamming into the weavers and hurling them back toward the chasm. Rocks, dirt, and debris followed in a torrential wave. The entities struggled against the current, their forms stretching like smoke in wind, but the pressure was too great, they tumbled over the edge, vanishing into the purple glow below. Silence fell, broken only by the groan of settling stone and the ragged breathing of the coalition. Leo slumped against a rock, his vision swimming. 1 point of energy remained. The device in his hands had gone dark, its crystal shattered. Is everyone? He began, but the words caught in his dry throat. Elara surveyed her mages. 2 had collapsed, their staves dark. The others leaned on each other, magic exhausted. Brother Kalen's priests were chanting healing prayers over minor wounds, cuts from flying debris, bruises from the pressure wave. We survived, Elara said, though it sounded less like victory and more like grim acknowledgement. But they knew we were coming. Those were scouts, not guards. Leo forced himself upright. The chasm still gaped before them, but the floating islands were gone. The Weaver's invisible bridge had dissipated. We need to cross, he said. The Nexus. There, Brother Kalen pointed. A narrow stone arch spanned the chasm, natural or created, Leo couldn't tell. It looked fragile, its surface cracked and worn, but it was the only path forward. They crossed in single file, weapons ready for another ambush that didn't come. The far side of the chasm opened into a valley that shouldn't have existed between mountain peaks, a circular depression half a mile across, its floor covered in crystalline formations that pulsed with inner light. Ley lines, visible to the naked eye as ribbons of blue energy that flowed through the air and ground, converging at the valley's center. The Nexus. Or what remained of it? Leo stared, his breath catching. The convergence point wasn't a place of power, it was a wound. A sphere of darkness hung above the central crystal formation, 50 feet in diameter, its surface swirling with impossible colors that hurt to perceive. From it, tendrils of void stretched down, attaching to the ley lines like leeches. Where they touched, the blue energy darkened to black, the crystals turning to dust. The ley lines weren't being consumed, they were being inverted, their life-giving magic twisted into something hungry and hollow. Already, a third of the Nexus showed this corruption, the black tendrils spreading outward. And standing before the central darkness, surrounded by a dozen void weavers who knelt in submission, was something else. A weaver, but magnitudes larger, 20 feet tall, its form so dense with void that light died within inches of its body. It had shape where the others were smoke, armored plates of solidified nothingness, limbs that ended in blades of anti-light, a crown of jagged crystal that pulsed with the same rhythm as the dying Nexus. Its eyes weren't white like the scouts, they were voids within voids, perfect spheres of absence that seemed to swallow the very concept of sight. It turned toward the coalition, and the valley trembled. The corrupted ley lines flared with black energy. The smaller weavers rose from their kneeling positions, forming a line between their master and the intruders. The massive entity didn't speak, but words formed in Leo's mind, cold and precise, each syllable like ice cracking in deep space. You have brought me the source. Leo's device, even shattered, registered the entity's presence. The readings went off the scale, reality fracture magnitude exceeding all previous measurements, gravitational anomalies that warped spacetime itself, magical signatures not just disrupted but actively consumed. The Weaver leader took a step forward. The ground didn't just shake, it unraveled. Stone turned to sand, then to dust, then to nothingness beneath its feet. It left a trail of void in its wake, a spreading stain where reality ceased to be. Leo had 1 point of divine energy remaining. The coalition was exhausted, their magic spent, their weapons inadequate. Before them stood not just a threat, but the embodiment of consequence, the end result of every physics edit, every reality fracture, every unintended ripple from his actions. The entity raised a blade arm, pointing directly at Leo. The gesture wasn't hostile, it was possessive. Your fractures are my feast. Your reality is my domain. And it began to advance. The Weaver Lord moved, and reality screamed. Its 20-foot frame didn't walk so much as the space between it and the coalition crumpled, folding like cheap parchment. Leo felt the distortion before he saw it, a sudden vertigo that made his stomach lurch, followed by the sickening sensation of gravity pulling in 3 different directions at once. Spread out. Elara's voice cut through the chaos, her staff already glowing with containment sigils. It's manipulating local physics. Leo's hand went to the Deus Ex Machina app, his fingers trembling as he pulled up the interface. Divine Energy, 1/100. The number blinked red, a mocking reminder of how little he had left. The Weaver Lord's crown of solidified void pulsed with dark light, and the floating islands around them began to rotate in impossible patterns, some accelerating upward while others drifted sideways against the wind. Gravity wells. Leo shouted, his voice raw. It's creating localized anomalies. Brother Kalen raised his holy symbol, chanting prayers to Aquaria. Water coalesced from the humid air, forming shimmering barriers between the coalition and the advancing entity. But as the liquid shields touched the Weaver Lord's distortion field, they didn't freeze or evaporate, they simply ceased to exist, unraveling into constituent atoms that scattered like dust. Magic fails against its core. Ilara called out, her face pale. It's consuming the spells at a fundamental level. The Weaver Lord raised a hand, and the ground beneath Marta and Alden buckled. Stone didn't crack, it flowed like liquid, then solidified mid-air in jagged spikes. Alden barely pulled Marta back as a spire of rock erupted where she'd been standing seconds before. Leo's mind raced. The app's simulation function was offline, not enough energy. He had to think like a physicist, not a god. The Weaver Lord wasn't just breaking physics, it was rewriting local laws, creating pockets of reality where different rules applied. Like a programmer editing code in real time, but with malicious intent. It's creating isolated physics domains. Leo yelled, tapping frantically at his device. Small areas with different constants. He selected a patch of ground 20 feet to the Weaver Lord's left. Gravity constant, 0.5 g, atmospheric pressure, 0.8 atm. He hit execute, and the app drained another 0.3 energy points. The display flashed, 0.7/100. The effect was immediate but subtle. The Weaver Lord didn't stumble, but its distortion field flickered. The entity turned its featureless face toward Leo, and for a moment, the physicist felt a cold, alien intelligence probing at the edges of his consciousness. It knew him. It recognized the source of the fractures. It's focusing on Leo. Gareth shouted from behind a rock formation, Finn crouched beside him with tools ready. The engineers, we need to get the convergence engine components closer. No time. Ilara countered, her staff now tracing complex geometric patterns in the air. We need to bind it first. Lyra, the star god emissary, stepped forward, her celestial armor glowing with starlight. I will attempt containment from the celestial plane. But my power is limited against something that feeds on reality itself. She raised her hands, and constellations appeared in the midday sky, impossible, brilliant patterns that cast sharp shadows. Beams of concentrated starlight lanced down, striking the Weaver Lord's void armor. For a moment, the entity staggered, dark smoke rising where the light touched. Then it absorbed the starlight. The beams didn't reflect or deflect, they flowed into the Weaver Lord's crown, darkening the celestial patterns above. Lyra gasped, her armor dimming. It's learning, she cried. Adapting to each attack. Leo watched, heart hammering. The Weaver Lord wasn't just powerful, it was intelligent. It analyzed each assault, incorporated the energy, evolved its defenses. Like a virus adapting to antibiotics. Coordinated assault. Ilara commanded. Magic to distract, physics to disrupt. Brother Kalen and the remaining priests began a chant, summoning torrents of blessed water that swirled around the Weaver Lord's legs. At the same moment, Master Torin and Corrin unleashed arcane bolts, not aimed at the entity itself, but at the space around it, creating a cage of magical interference. The Weaver Lord hesitated, its distortion field rippling as conflicting energies collided. This was their chance. Leo opened the app's electromagnetic controls. He couldn't affect the Weaver Lord directly, its void nature seemed to absorb or negate most energy types. But he could affect the environment. The ley line Nexus thrummed beneath them, a river of magical energy that made the air taste of ozone and wildflowers. That energy had physical properties, ionization, thermal gradients, electromagnetic signatures. Gareth. Leo shouted without looking away from his screen. The convergence engine, can you activate the magnetic containment module? Not without the full assembly, the engineer called back. But the core coil is charged. Then get ready to discharge it on my mark. Leo selected a 10-foot radius around the Weaver Lord. Electromagnetic pulse, localized, non-lethal intensity. He hesitated, this would drain him to near zero. But if it disrupted the entity's connection to the Nexus, even for a moment. He executed the command. The app drained 0.6 energy points. Display, 0.1/100. A silent wave of electromagnetic energy erupted from the ground, invisible but tangible. The air crackled with static discharge. Small rocks lifted momentarily, then fell. The Weaver Lord's distortion field flickered violently, like a corrupted hologram. Now! Leo screamed. Gareth slammed a lever on the convergence engine's core component. A magnetic containment field bloomed, not strong enough to trap the Weaver Lord, but sufficient to interfere with its absorption of the Nexus's power. For 3 precious seconds, the entity's connection to the ley lines wavered. Ilara saw the opening. Her staff blazed with light so intense it hurt to look at. Binding of the 7th circle, she intoned, and reality itself seemed to bend around her words. Golden chains of pure magical force erupted from the ground, wrapping around the Weaver Lord's limbs, its torso, its crown. The entity struggled. The chains held. For a moment, hope flickered in Leo's chest. They'd done it. They'd contained the... Then the Weaver Lord began to absorb the binding spells. Not break them. Absorb them. The golden chains darkened, their light draining into the void armor. The magical energy flowed upward, feeding the crown, which pulsed with renewed hunger. Ilara staggered, blood trickling from her nose as her spell was consumed. It's feeding on the magic itself, she gasped, leaning heavily on her staff. The Weaver Lord raised both hands now. The ground beneath the Nexus began to liquefy, not into magma, but into something darker, a substance that drank light and whispered of forgotten places. The massive void sphere at the valley's center expanded, its edges creeping toward the coalition. Leo checked his app 0.1/100. He had one tiny adjustment left in him. One final tweak to reality's settings. The Weaver Lord turned fully toward him, ignoring the others. It took a step forward, and the ground didn't just shake, it sang, a low harmonic vibration that made teeth ache. The entity's featureless face seemed to focus on Leo, on the device in his hands. Source, a voice echoed, not through air but through space itself, vibrating in their bones. Fracture Maker. It reached out a hand, and Leo felt the app grow warm, then hot. The device was trying to connect to something, to the Weaver Lord's distortion field, to the Nexus, to both. Warning messages flashed, reality instability detected. Divine energy critical. Leo, get back. Marta shouted, but her voice sounded distant, muffled by the growing distortion. The Weaver Lord's hand closed into a fist. The Nexus's power, previously a diffuse glow throughout the valley, coalesced into visible streams of energy, rivers of light that flowed from the ground, from the air, from the very stones, all converging on the entity's crown. It was absorbing the ley line Nexus. Not just feeding on fractures anymore, but consuming the source of magical energy for this entire region. Leo tried to move, to run, to do anything. But his legs felt heavy, as if gravity had tripled around him. He looked down at the app 0.1/100. One final adjustment. He selected the air immediately around the Weaver Lord. Oxygen concentration, 0%. Nitrogen, 100%. Create a localized anoxic zone. It wouldn't hurt the entity, void beings probably didn't breathe, but it might disrupt whatever process it was using to absorb the Nexus's energy. Chemical reactions required oxygen, even magical ones sometimes followed physical laws. He executed the command. The app drained the last 0.1 energy points. Display, 0/100. The interface went dark. Not sleeping, not low power, dark. Empty. For the first time since he downloaded Deus Ex Machina, Leo felt utterly, completely mortal. The anoxic zone formed. The Weaver Lord didn't choke or stagger, but the streams of Nexus energy flickered. For half a second, the absorption process hesitated. Then the entity's crown blazed with dark light, and the streams resumed, stronger than before. The Weaver Lord had adapted again. It took another step toward Leo, and the ground between them didn't just crack, it inverted. A section of earth 10 feet across flipped upside down, soil and rocks hanging suspended above a hole that led, somewhere else. Somewhere dark. Retreat. Ilara commanded, her voice strained. We cannot hold it. But Leo couldn't retreat. The inverted ground formed a barrier between him and the others. He stood alone, 20 feet from a being that was consuming reality itself, with an empty app and no divine energy left. The Weaver Lord reached the edge of the inverted section. It didn't climb or jump, it simply stepped onto the upside-down soil as if it were normal ground, walking on what should have been ceiling. Physics meant nothing to it anymore. Its hand extended toward Leo. Not to strike, but to touch. To connect. Leo backed up, his heel hitting a rock. He stumbled, caught himself. The app in his hand felt like dead weight. The Weaver Lord's fingers were inches from his face when the Nexus's power surge hit. Not a controlled absorption anymore, but a violent consumption. The ley lines beneath the valley screamed, an actual sound, high-pitched and agonized. The streams of energy turned from light to something darker, almost liquid, pouring into the Weaver Lord's crown. The entity grew. Not larger, but denser, more real. Its void armor solidified into something that looked less like absence and more like polished obsidian. The crown gleamed with stolen power. It had started as a consumer of fractures. Now it was becoming something else, a being fueled by the very source of magic in this region. And it was still reaching for Leo. For the source of the fractures. For the one who had made this all possible. Leo's mind raced through options that no longer existed. No energy for physics edits. No tools but the invention sketchpad, which required stable reality to function. No allies who could reach him through the inverted terrain. He was alone. Empty. Facing a god of void that he had helped create. The Weaver Lord's fingers touched his chest. Not pain. Not cold. Nothingness. A sensation of unraveling, of coming apart at the seams, of being edited out of existence. And in that moment, with his last thought before the void took him, Leo understood the terrible truth: he hadn't just broken reality. He had set the table for something infinitely hungrier to feast. The Weaver Lord's touch was cold, not the chill of winter or the damp of a cave, but an absolute absence that seemed to leach warmth from Leo's very bones. Its fingers, formed of solidified void, pressed against his chest, and for a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the sensation began, a slow, creeping numbness that spread outward from the contact point, as if his body were dissolving into static. Leo could feel the entity's hunger, not for flesh or blood, but for the fundamental laws that held him together. It was tasting the physics edits he'd woven into reality, savoring the fractures he'd created. Around them, the ley line Nexus pulsed with chaotic energy. The valley had transformed into a nightmare landscape, the ground buckled and warped, floating islands of earth drifted lazily overhead, and the air shimmered with distorted light. The massive void sphere at the Nexus's heart had expanded, its surface rippling like black water. Void weavers knelt in concentric circles around their lord, their forms shifting and merging with the shadows. Elara and the mages were struggling to maintain their positions, their binding spells unraveling as the Weaver Lord absorbed their magic. Brother Kalen's prayers to Aquaria faltered, the water goddess's power dissipating in the entity's presence. Gareth shouted orders to Finn, but the convergence engine's magnetic containment field was flickering, its components straining under the strain. Leo's mind raced, cutting through the numbness. The app interface in his vision was dark, zero divine energy, the bar completely empty. No more edits, no more manipulations. But the Weaver Lord wasn't just consuming magic, it was feeding on the Nexus itself, drawing power from the ley lines that crisscrossed the region. And that gave him an idea. A desperate, reckless idea. He remembered the simulation from Iron Vein, the combined physics-magic cascade he designed to seal rifts. But this wasn't a rift, it was a convergence point, a focal point where reality fractures intersected. If he could overload it, trigger a controlled collapse. The Weaver Lord's voice echoed in his mind, not in words but in concepts, asterisk source. Fracture. Consume, asterisk its grip tightened, and Leo felt a sharp pain as the void began to seep into his skin. He had seconds, maybe less. Elara, he shouted, his voice raw. The Nexus, it's drawing power from the ley lines. Elara's eyes snapped to him, her face pale beneath her Archmage's robes. She was holding a staff carved with runes, its tip glowing faintly. I can feel it, she called back. But our magic is ineffective. It adapts too quickly. Not magic, Leo gasped. Physics. We need to overload the system. Create a cascade that seals the fractures from the inside out. Brother Kalen staggered closer, his priestly garments torn. How? Your energy is gone. Leo's gaze swept the battlefield. Alden was nearby, the blacksmith clutching a toolkit he'd brought from Iron Vein. Inside were the rift-sealing devices they'd built, simple machines based on Leo's invention sketchpad designs, meant to stabilize gravity wells and atmospheric distortions. But they could be repurposed. Alden. Leo yelled, straining against the Weaver Lord's hold. The devices, deploy them at the Nexus's key points. The convergence engine's nodes, the ley line intersections. Set them to maximum output. Alden's eyes widened. That could cause a feedback loop. It might destroy everything. It's our only chance, Leo said, his voice dropping to a whisper as the void crept up his neck. Elara, Brother Kalen, combine your magic. Not to bind, but to amplify. Channel it through the devices. Create a resonance that overloads the Nexus. Elara hesitated, her training warring with the desperation of the moment. Magic and physics had been at odds since Leo's arrival, their principles clashing. But here, at the brink of annihilation, the distinction blurred. She nodded sharply. We'll need precise timing. And energy to initiate the cascade. Leo closed his eyes, reaching deep. The app was empty, but there was a flicker, a residual spark from his last edits, so faint it was almost imperceptible. He focused on it, drawing on the memory of gravitational pulls and pressure gradients. It wasn't enough to change reality, but maybe enough to start a chain reaction. He spent it all in one burst, 0.1 divine energy, the last dregs of his power. Not on an edit, but on a trigger, a localized vibration in the air molecules around the Nexus, tuned to the frequency of the rift sealing devices. The effect was immediate. The devices in Alden's toolkit hummed to life, their components aligning. Alden didn't wait, he sprinted toward the Nexus, dodging floating debris and Weaver shadows. He placed the first device at the base of the convergence engine, where Gareth and Finn were struggling to maintain the magnetic field. The second went at a ley line intersection marked by glowing runes in the ground. The third, he hurled toward the void sphere itself, where it stuck to the surface like a barnacle. Now! Leo screamed. Elara raised her staff, chanting in the ancient tongue of Archmages. Brother Kalen joined her, his prayers to Aquaria weaving into the incantation. Their magic merged, a stream of blue light from Elara, a shimmering wave of water energy from Kalen, and flowed into the devices. The Nexus reacted violently. The void sphere convulsed, its surface cracking with lines of white light. The ground shuddered, and the floating islands began to spiral inward. The Weaver Lord released Leo, turning its attention to the disruption. Its crown of void flared, and it raised a hand, summoning tendrils of darkness to strike at the devices. But it was too late. The cascade had begun. Physics and magic collided in a symphony of chaos. Gravity wells inverted, pulling the void sphere inward. Atmospheric pressure spiked, compressing the Weaver's forms. Electromagnetic pulses from the convergence engine interfered with their reality distortion abilities. And through it all, Elara and Kalen's amplified magic acted as a conductor, forcing the overload to spread through every fracture in the Nexus. Leo collapsed to his knees, the last of his energy gone. His vision blurred, and he could feel the cold of the ground seeping into his bones. He watched as the cascade unfolded, a beautiful, terrifying display of light and shadow, order and entropy. The void sphere shrank, its mass collapsing in on itself. The Weaver Lord roared, a sound that tore at the fabric of reality, and lashed out with void tendrils, but they dissipated in the overload. For a moment, it seemed to work. The Nexus stabilized, the fractures sealing one by one. The Weavers writhed, their forms unraveling. Elara and Kalen held their ground, their combined magic a beacon in the storm. Then the Weaver Lord retaliated. It didn't attack the devices or the mages. It turned its full fury on Leo. With a gesture, it inverted the ground beneath him, sending him tumbling into a newly formed chasm. Void tendrils shot after him, wrapping around his limbs. And as Leo fell, he saw the entity's crown glow brighter, drawing power not from the Nexus now, but from the cascade itself, feeding on the very overload meant to destroy it. The last thing he heard was Elara's shout, cut off by the roar of collapsing reality. Then darkness took him. The ground trembled with the aftershocks of the cascade, a low-frequency hum that vibrated through bones and stone alike. Around Leo's collapsed form, the coalition fought a desperate holding action against the swarming void weavers. Shadows moved with predatory grace, their forms flickering between solidity and smoke as they fed on the magical energy bleeding from the overloaded ley line Nexus. Elara stood with her staff planted firmly, sweat beading on her forehead as she maintained the amplification spell. "Hold the perimeter," she shouted, her voice strained but commanding. "The cascade needs time to propagate." Arcane barriers shimmered around the mages, but with each impact from the Weaver's void tendrils, the magic flickered and dimmed. Brother Kalen chanted prayers to Aquaria, his hands glowing with watery light that washed over injured fighters, but the divine energy seemed thin and diluted here at the reality fracture's epicenter. Alden swung his hammer with the desperation of a man who knew this was their last stand. The rift-sealing devices he deployed at Leo's instruction glowed with unstable blue light, their electromagnetic fields interacting unpredictably with the magical overload. One device sparked violently as a weaver passed too close, the entity recoiling with a sound like tearing silk. "They're learning!" Alden yelled, backing toward where Leo lay unconscious. They're adapting to the devices. Gareth worked frantically at the convergence engine's controls, his engineer's mind calculating probabilities even as his hands shook. The magnetic containment is fluctuating, he called to Finn, who struggled to stabilize a power conduit. If it fails completely, the cascade could reverse and tear this whole valley apart. The Weaver Lord, momentarily distracted by the cascade's energy, had released Leo but now turned its attention back to the source of its disruption. 20 feet of solidified void shifted, its crown of fractured light rotating slowly as it assessed the battlefield. Where it stepped, the ground didn't just invert, it ceased to exist, leaving patches of absolute nothingness that drank light and sound. The entity raised a hand, and 3 weavers detached from the swarm, moving with coordinated purpose toward the most vulnerable of the rift sealing devices. Leo's consciousness returned in fragments. First came the pain, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that felt like his very cells were protesting existence. Then came the sensory input, the smell of ozone and burnt magic, the taste of copper in his mouth, the sight of fractured sky through half-lidded eyes. His body refused to obey commands, muscles responding with weak tremors when he tried to move. The Deus Ex Machina app interface floated in his mind's eye, its energy bar reading a flat, terrifying 0. No divine energy remained to manipulate physics, no reserve to create miracles. But his mind still worked. The physics student in him analyzed the cascade's progression even as the human part screamed in panic. The overload was propagating through the ley lines, yes, but unevenly. Some fractures were sealing too quickly, creating pressure differentials that threatened to rupture elsewhere. Other rifts were resisting entirely, their edges fraying further as the magical and physical energies clashed. It was like watching a poorly designed dam fail in slow motion, the water would find the weakest point and burst through with catastrophic force. His fingers twitched, brushing against the leather pouch at his belt. The invention sketchpad. Not a tool for direct reality manipulation, but for design. For planning. For tweaking parameters. Era, he managed, the word barely more than a breath. The Archmage didn't hear him over the battle's din. But Marta, fighting nearby with a borrowed sword, saw his movement. The village elder dropped to her knees beside him, her face etched with concern that went beyond tactical considerations. Leo. Can you hear me? Sketchpad, he whispered, each syllable an effort. Need to adjust the cascade. Marta understood immediately. She fumbled with the pouch, her calloused hand surprisingly gentle as she extracted the pad and charcoal stylus. Tell me what to draw. Leo's mind raced through calculations. The cascade was essentially a feedback loop, magical energy amplified by the convergence engine, channeled through the rift sealing devices, creating a wave of stabilization that propagated through reality fractures. But the weavers were feeding on that energy, and the uneven propagation was creating stress points. What if he could create a secondary feedback loop within the primary one? A harmonic resonance that would reinforce the sealing effect while creating interference patterns the weavers couldn't consume. Triangular array, he breathed. Around the main rift. Not physical. Energy pattern. Phase shifted, 90 degrees from primary cascade. Marta's brow furrowed as she sketched, her strokes hesitant at first but growing more confident as Leo guided her through the geometry. Like this? Yes. Now, frequency modulation. Sine wave with decaying amplitude. His mind supplied the mathematical notation, and Marta translated it into the diagrammatic language of the sketchpad. The tool glowed faintly as it accepted the design, its magic recognizing intent even without divine energy to power it. On the battlefield, the situation deteriorated. 2 of the rift sealing devices failed simultaneously, their containment fields collapsing with concussive booms that threw several fighters to the ground. The Weaver Lord advanced, its void armor drinking the light from Alara's barrier spells. Brother Kalen's prayers faltered as the divine connection grew tenuous. Aquaria's power, like all magic, was being disrupted by the physics of the cascade. Now. Leo gasped. Activate it. Through the convergence engine. Marta scrambled toward Gareth, the sketchpad held aloft. Engineer. Leo's design. Modify the cascade. Gareth took one look at the diagrams and his eyes widened with understanding. Phase-shifted harmonic reinforcement. Brilliant. His hands flew over the controls, recalibrating the engine's output frequencies. Finn assisted, adjusting dials with precision born of apprenticeship. But we need a power source for the secondary loop. The engine's already at capacity. Alara heard the exchange. Without hesitation, she redirected part of her amplification spell, channeling it not at the cascade but at the convergence engine itself. Take it, she gritted through clenched teeth. But hurry. I can't hold both. The Weaver Lord sensed the shift in energies. It turned its crown toward the engine, void tendrils lashing out to intercept the new pattern. But the harmonic reinforcement was already propagating, a shimmering web of energy that intersected the primary cascade at precise angles, creating interference patterns that reinforced the sealing effect while oscillating at frequencies the weavers couldn't assimilate. The change was immediate and dramatic. Where before the cascade had been a blunt force washing over fractures, now it became a precision instrument. Rifts sealed with surgical neatness, their edges knitting together like healing wounds. The secondary feedback loop created standing waves of stabilization that repelled the void weavers, their forms flickered violently when they approached, as if encountering a frequency that disrupted their very coherence. The Weaver Lord roared, a sound that had no place in any physical medium, a vibration that made reality itself shudder. It charged the convergence engine, void tendrils coalescing into a spear of absolute negation aimed at the heart of the machine. Leo, with effort that felt like lifting mountains, pushed himself to a sitting position. His eyes met Alara's across the battlefield. No words were needed. The Archmage understood. She redirected the last of her amplification spell, not at the cascade, not at the engine, but at the harmonic pattern itself. The Weaver Lord's spear struck the convergence engine, and met not metal and magic, but the reinforced standing wave of the secondary feedback loop. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the harmonic resonance found the frequency of the void entity's own existence. The Weaver Lord fragmented. Not like breaking glass, but like a complex equation simplifying to zero. Its form unraveled along the seams of its own contradictions, the void armor dissolving into harmless shadows that dissipated in the cascade's light. The crown of fractured light dimmed, then winked out. The entity didn't die, it ceased to be, banished from a reality whose physics now actively rejected its presence. With their leader gone, the remaining void weavers lost cohesion. Some fled into the smaller rifts that still remained open. Others simply dissipated, their connection to this plane severed. The swarm broke apart like smoke in a strong wind. Silence fell, broken only by the hum of the stabilizing Nexus and the ragged breathing of exhausted fighters. The main rift, the massive void sphere that had consumed part of the valley, was sealed, but the scar remained. The ground where it had been was smooth and featureless, a circle of perfect nothingness that reflected no light. The ley line Nexus still pulsed with power, but erratically, like a heartbeat recovering from trauma. Leo collapsed back to the ground, his brief moment of clarity spent. He stared at the fractured sky, watching as the unnatural auroras caused by the reality fractures slowly faded. The Deus Ex Machina interface still showed zero energy, but for the first time, he noticed something new, a faint, almost imperceptible trickle, like a battery beginning to recharge after complete depletion. 0.1/100. Then 0.2. Painfully slow, but present. Alara approached him, her staff serving as a crutch. She looked older than she had at the battle's start, lines of exhaustion etched deep. The rift is sealed, she said, her voice hollow with spent effort. But the Nexus. Before she could finish, the air above the valley shimmered. Not with the wrongness of void tears, but with a different kind of power, clean, cold, and distant. Figures descended from the sky, not flying but simply existing at different elevations as if gravity were a suggestion they could decline. The star gods had arrived. There were 3 of them, though counting them felt inaccurate, their forms shifted between humanoid shapes and constellations, between solid bodies and patterns of light. The lead figure wore robes that seemed woven from nebula dust, his face obscured by a corona of stellar fire. His eyes, when they focused on the scene below, held no warmth, only calculation. They landed without sound, their feet not quite touching the scarred ground. The lead star god surveyed the sealed rift, the damaged Nexus, the exhausted coalition. His gaze passed over Alara, over Brother Kalen, over the injured and dead, and finally settled on Leo. The anomaly, the star god said, his voice the sound of planets moving in their orbits. The source of the orbital edits that disrupted our celestial magic. He didn't sound angry. He sounded interested. Like a scientist examining a curious specimen. You contained the void incursion. But at what cost to the ley lines? To reality's integrity? He gestured, and the other star gods began moving through the battlefield, their forms leaving trails of starlight. They examined the convergence engine, the remains of rift-sealing devices, the bodies of fallen void weavers. Everywhere they went, they took measurements not with instruments, but with their presence, reading the aftermath in wavelengths invisible to mortal eyes. The lead star god stepped closer to Leo. Up close, his corona gave off no heat, only a profound coldness that spoke of interstellar voids. Your physics manipulations saved this valley, he acknowledged. But they also created the fractures the void entities exploited. Cause and effect. Action and consequence. He tilted his head, studying Leo with detached curiosity. The question now becomes, are you a solution? Or merely a different kind of problem? Around them, the coalition watched, weapons lowered but not sheathed. Ilara's hand tightened on her staff. Brother Kayla murmured a prayer that sounded more like a plea. Marta moved to stand between Leo and the star god, her expression defiant despite her exhaustion. The star god noticed none of this. His attention remained fixed on Leo. Your energy signature is unique, he observed. Not divine, not arcane. Something else. Something that overwrites local physics as if reality were a manuscript to be edited. He paused, and for the first time, something like emotion entered his voice, not concern, not anger, but something colder, academic interest. We will need to study this. To understand what you are. And to determine what must be done with you. He raised a hand, and the other star gods ceased their examination, returning to his side. The lead entity looked from Leo to the damaged Nexus, then to the sky where his kindred moved in their eternal dances. The void threat is contained, he pronounced. For now. But the fractures in reality remain. And you. His starlight eyes bored into Leo. You are the fracture's source. That makes you our concern. He didn't say what would happen next. He didn't need to. The implication hung in the air, colder than the void the weavers had brought, heavier than the gravity wells Leo had once manipulated. The battle was over. The rift was sealed. But as the star god stood assessing the damage and the damaged man who had caused it, Leo understood with perfect, terrible clarity that some consequences couldn't be edited away. The ley line Nexus lay scarred but stable, its once chaotic energy now flowing in subdued currents beneath the earth. Leo knelt on the cracked ground, his hands pressed against the cool soil as if trying to feel the pulse of reality itself. His breathing came in shallow gasps, each inhale a reminder of how empty he felt. The Deus Ex Machina app on his mental interface showed a pitiful 0.2/100 divine energy, barely enough to lift a pebble, let alone alter physics. He could feel the app's presence like a phantom limb, still there but drained of power. Around him, the battlefield told the story of their desperate struggle. The convergence engine Gareth had built stood smoking, its copper coils glowing with residual heat. Fractures in reality still shimmered at the edges of his vision, hairline cracks in the air that leaked faint whispers of void. Marta moved among the wounded villagers, her practical hands binding cuts and burns while Alden checked his flintlock musket with the careful attention of a craftsman who knew his work had saved lives. Ilara approached, her archmage robes torn at the hem and stained with soot. The Nexus is holding, she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much magic fail. But the fractures, they're not fully sealed. Like wounds that refuse to heal. Leo nodded, his mind already calculating. He could see the patterns, the way gravity still fluctuated slightly near the largest fracture, how light bent around it in unnatural ways. They're anchored to the ley lines, he murmured. The physics magic cascade sealed the main rift, but these smaller ones, they're feeding off residual energy. He wished he had even a fraction of his divine energy left to test the theory. The three star gods stood apart, their celestial forms shimmering with restrained power. The lead entity, taller than the others, with eyes that held entire constellations, turned its gaze toward Leo. The orbital edits you performed disrupted our astrological calculations, it said, its voice resonating not through air but through space itself. Tides of magic that should have flowed predictably now churn with chaos. Leo felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool mountain air. I didn't mean to, he began, but the star god raised a hand. Intent is irrelevant to consequence, it interrupted. You have demonstrated both destructive capability and restorative potential. We will monitor your actions. Should you prove a solution to the fractures spreading through reality, you may earn our cooperation. Should you prove a problem. It left the threat hanging in the air, heavy as a collapsing star. The other two star gods moved across the battlefield, their footsteps leaving faint starlight impressions on the ground. One examined the convergence engine, its fingers tracing the harmonic reinforcement pattern Leo had designed. The other knelt by the largest remaining fracture, peering into the void as if reading a text only deities could understand. Brother Kalen approached, his priestly robes torn but his expression calm. Aquaria withdraws, he said quietly to Leo. She acknowledges your role in containing the threat, but the disruption to her hydrological domains, it will take time to forgive. He placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. I will speak for you when I can. Leo felt the weight of that promise. This priest who had once panicked over anomalous rain now stood as a potential ally. Thank you, he said, the words feeling inadequate. Elara watched the exchange, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The Archmages have much to discuss, she said. But I offer this, an ongoing alliance. Your physics-based solutions complement our magic in ways I never imagined possible. She gestured to the convergence engine. That device shouldn't work. The harmonics defy magical theory. Yet it sealed rifts my strongest spells could only contain. Leo looked at his invention sketchpad, still tucked in his belt. The simple tool felt heavier than ever. I need to understand more, he said. About the fractures, about the void weavers, about why my edits cause this. Then learn, Elara said. But learn quickly. The Empire has taken notice. As if summoned by her words, movement caught Leo's eye at the edge of the clearing. Figures moved through the trees, not villagers or mages, but scouts in unfamiliar armor. One carried a banner he didn't recognize, a stylized eye surrounded by geometric patterns. They watched from a distance, making no move to approach, but their presence was unmistakable. Marta noticed them too. Scouts, she said quietly, coming to stand beside Leo. From the northern provinces, by the look of their gear. Word travels fast when reality itself tears open. Gareth joined them, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. The engine will need maintenance, he said, his engineer's mind already moving to practical concerns. But it held. Your design held. He looked at Leo with new respect. You're not just some anomaly-causing student, are you? Leo thought of his tiny apartment back home, of physics textbooks and overdue assignments. I was, he said softly. Just a student trying to relax with a stupid app. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had typed equations into a God simulator, that had adjusted gravity coefficients as casually as changing a light bulb. But every action has consequences. Even when you don't understand the rules of the game you're playing. The divine energy counter ticked up to 0.3/100. A barely perceptible increase, but it meant the app was recharging. Slowly. Too slowly for comfort. Alden approached, his blacksmith's muscles tense. What now? He asked, his eyes scanning the tree line where the scouts had been. They'll come back. With more than scouts next time. Leo stood, his legs trembling slightly from exhaustion. He looked at the people around him, Marta with her practical wisdom, Alden with his crafted weapons, Gareth with his engineering genius, Elara with her magical knowledge, Brother Kalen with his faith, even the star gods with their celestial judgment. All pieces of a world he had thrown into chaos. I need to rebuild, he said, the words firming as he spoke them. Not just my energy. My understanding. He looked at the largest fracture, still shimmering with unstable energy. The void weavers came through these rifts. They feed on reality fractures. My edits caused those fractures. He met Elara's gaze. You said my solutions complement magic. Teach me what I need to know. About ley lines. About magical theory. About how this world works when physics isn't being overridden. Elara nodded slowly. It will not be easy. Many still see you as a threat. I know, Leo said. He thought of Aquaria's withdrawn pantheon, of the star god's cold assessment, of the scouts watching from the trees. But I caused this. I have to fix it. The divine energy ticked to 0.4/100. Still barely anything, but it was movement. Progress. As the coalition began to disperse, villagers returning to their homes, mages gathering their wounded, engineers packing tools, Leo remained at the Nexus. He watched the fractures, memorizing their patterns. He noted how the scarred ground seemed to pulse in time with his own heartbeat, as if the land itself remembered the battle. The star gods departed last, fading into the sky like mist evaporating in sunlight. But their presence lingered, a watchful pressure at the edge of his awareness. When only Marta remained, she placed a hand on his arm. Oakhaven will stand with you, she said. For now. But villages have short memories when crops fail or children get sick. I understand, Leo said. He looked toward the mountains where the scouts had disappeared. New factions are coming. They've heard about the God of Physics. He said the title with irony, but it tasted bitter on his tongue. They'll want to use me. Or destroy me. Marta squeezed his arm. Then be neither, she said. Be Leo. The student who's learning. He watched her walk away, joining Alden and the other villagers on the path back to whatever normalcy remained. Alone at the scarred Nexus, with only the whispering fractures for company, Leo opened his invention sketchpad. The blank page stared back at him, waiting for designs that could seal rifts or build alliances or maybe just help one overwhelmed physics student understand what he had become. The divine energy counter read 0.5/100. In the distance, movement caught his eye again. More scouts, different armor this time, with symbols he didn't recognize. They watched from a different ridge, their presence a silent promise. The battle was over, but the war for reality was just beginning. Leo closed the sketchpad. He took one last look at the fractures, at the convergence engine, at the battlefield where he had nearly died. Then he turned and began walking, following the path the villagers had taken. His steps were slow, measured. Each one carried the weight of everything he had broken and everything he needed to rebuild. The app's interface glowed faintly in his mind's eye. 0.6/100 divine energy. Still critically low. Still dangerous. But it was growing. And so was he.